Rain hammered the stained glass while Serafina Vale stood outside Luca Moretti's study, holding a tray of cold espresso. Inside, men whispered about murder. Then came the sound she feared most, black rosary beads clicking against knuckles. For 11 months, she'd been his wife without ever being touched. Their marriage was protection, not love. A contract sealed after her father's death. But when she finally asked, "Did you ever love me?" he answered with one brutal word, "No." So she walked into the freezing Chicago night carrying only her father's leather document tube, a damaged prayer book, and her last shred of dignity. What she didn't know was that hidden inside those pages was evidence capable of destroying the most powerful criminal empire in America. And every killer in the city was already hunting her for it. If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Das on it. The espresso had gone cold an hour ago. Serafina Vale pressed her spine against the hallway wall outside Luca Moretti's private study, balancing the silver tray with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Through the half-open door, Italian vowels twisted into threats she couldn't fully understand, but tone was a language all its own. Someone was about to die. She'd learned to read violence the way other women read recipes. The pitch of a man's voice before he pulled a trigger. The specific silence that followed an order no one questioned. 11 months married to the most feared man in Chicago had taught her survival, not safety. Thunder cracked outside. Rain slammed against the stained glass windows hard enough to rattle the frames, casting fractured colors across marble floors that probably cost more than her entire childhood. Everything in this estate screamed wealth built on blood. Even the art on the walls, Renaissance paintings of saints and suffering, felt like warnings. Then she heard it, the slow, deliberate click of rosary beads striking knuckles. Luca, her husband. The sound moved through her chest like a physical thing tightening around her ribs. She'd heard that sound before arguments, before disappearances, before men left the estate in body bags wearing suits they'd never chosen themselves. "You disrespected protocol," Luca's voice came through the doorway, calm as winter. "Worse, you disrespected me." "Boss, I swear on my mother's life. Why, your mother's already dead, Marco. Try something more valuable." Serafina closed her eyes. She didn't want to hear this. Didn't want to be the woman standing in hallways holding coffee for men who spoke about killing the way normal people discussed weather. But leaving meant walking past that door, and walking past that door meant Luca would see her, and seeing her would remind him she existed. Sometimes, invisibility was the only protection available. "Please, boss, give me time to make this right." "Time?" The rosary beads clicked faster. "You sold information to the Bellucci family. You think time fixes betrayal?" The espresso cup rattled against the saucer. Serafina's hands shook harder. She pressed the tray against her stomach, trying to still the noise, but porcelain scraped silver with a sound that felt deafening in the terrible quiet that followed Luca's words. The conversation inside stopped. Footsteps approached the door. Her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs, trapped there like a scream she'd been swallowing for almost a year. The door opened fully. Luca Moretti stood in the frame, 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so goddamn terrifying. Sharp jawline, permanent shadow of stubble, eyes the color of smoke before fire. But it was the stillness that made him dangerous. Most violent men moved like storms, loud, chaotic, obvious. Luca moved like winter, slow, inevitable, already inside you before you realized the cold had started. His gaze dropped to the tray in her hands, then lifted to her face. "You've been standing there a while," he said quietly. Not a question, an observation. He knew exactly how long she'd been there because Luca Moretti knew everything that happened inside his own house. Probably knew she'd been holding that espresso since before the meeting started, waiting for permission to exist in the same hallway as his business. "You told me to bring coffee," Serafina managed. Her voice came out steadier than her hands. "Small victory. An hour ago." "You were busy." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not emotion exactly. More like acknowledgement that she'd just played the game correctly, stayed quiet, stayed patient, stayed out of the way like a good wife should. He stepped aside. Bring it in. The study smelled like leather and cigar smoke and something else. Fear, maybe. Or blood. Hard to tell the difference anymore. Marco stood near the desk, face white, hands clenched at his sides like he was physically holding himself together. Two other men flanked him, Roman DeLuca, Luca's enforcer, built like violence had a physical form, and Enzo Vitale, the family lawyer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Serafina crossed to the desk and set the tray down with hands that almost didn't shake. She kept her eyes on the espresso, not the men, not the gun resting on the desk blotter beside a stack of financial documents, not the rosary beads wrapped around Luca's knuckles like brass knuckles made of faith. Serafina. She looked up. Luca was watching her with that particular intensity that made her feel like he could see through skin and bone straight into the parts of herself she kept locked away. Yes? You remember Marco? It wasn't a question. Of course she remembered Marco. He'd been at their wedding, standing in the back of the room, wearing an expression that suggested he'd been attending a funeral instead of a marriage, which, in retrospect, might have been accurate. I remember, she said carefully. Marco made a mistake. Luca's voice stayed calm, conversational, the way someone might discuss traffic or weather. He shared information he shouldn't have shared with people he shouldn't have shared it with. Now, people are dead because of his mistake. You understand? Serafina's throat felt like sandpaper. Yes. Good. Luca turned back to Marco. You see? Even my wife understands loyalty. Why is it so hard for you? Marco's face crumpled. Boss, please, get out. The words dropped like stones. Marco blinked. What? You heard me. Get out of my house. Out of my city. You've got 48 hours to disappear before I change my mind and make disappearing permanent. The relief that crashed across Marco's face was so raw it was almost painful to witness. He stammered something, thanks probably, or promises, but Luca had already dismissed him, turning his attention to the paperwork on his desk like the man he'd just spared wasn't still standing there shaking. Roman grabbed Marco's arm and hauled him toward the door. Enzo followed, moving with the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned that invisibility kept you breathing. Then the door closed, and Serafina was alone with her husband. Luca picked up the espresso she'd brought, examined it with the same focus he gave everything, then set it back down untouched. It's cold, he observed. I've been holding it for an hour. Yes. He unwrapped the rosary beads from his knuckles slowly, like removing armor. You could have left it in the kitchen. You told me to bring it. I told you to bring coffee, not to stand in hallways listening to private conversations. Heat flooded her face. I wasn't... Don't lie to me, Serafina. Still calm, still quiet. Somehow, that made it worse. We both know you heard everything. The question is what you plan to do with what you heard. She met his eyes. Nothing. I plan to do nothing. Smart. The word should have felt like approval. Instead, it felt like a cage door locking. Luca moved around the desk, closing the distance between them with steps that made no sound on expensive carpet. He stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably had a name she couldn't pronounce. You've been crying, he said. Serafina stiffened. She'd thought she'd hidden it better than that. Thought the careful makeup she'd applied that morning had covered the evidence of the breakdown she'd had in the bathroom at 3 a.m., staring at her own reflection and wondering who the hell she'd become. I'm fine. That wasn't an invitation to lie again. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. Why do you care? Something crossed his face. Not hurt exactly. More like surprise that she'd push back at all. You're my wife, he said simply. Am I? The words came out before she could stop them, breaking through months of careful silence. Serafina watched Luca's expression shift. Not anger, not yet, but something colder. Calculation. He was weighing her, measuring this crack in her carefully maintained obedience. You want to clarify that question? He asked softly. She should have backed down. Should have apologized. Should have played the game the way she'd been playing it for 11 months. Quiet, compliant, grateful for protection even when that protection felt like suffocation. Instead, she kept talking. When was the last time you looked at me? The words tumbled out faster now, gaining momentum. Actually looked at me, not just checked to make sure I was still breathing and following orders. When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your business or your schedule or who I'm allowed to speak to? Serafina, when was the last time you touched me? The question hung in the air between them like something physical, something that couldn't be taken back. Luca's jaw tightened. We had an agreement. A contract. We had a contract. A contract you signed willingly. Willingly? Her laugh came out sharp enough to cut. My father was barely cold in the ground. Men I'd never seen before were showing up at my apartment asking questions I couldn't answer. I was terrified. You offered protection, and I took it because I didn't have any other choice. Don't pretend that's the same thing as willing. For a long moment, Luca said nothing. He just watched her with those smoke-colored eyes, and Serafina wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. If this was how it ended, not with violence exactly, but with a cold dismissal that would feel just as final. Then he spoke. Did you ever ask yourself why I offered? What? Protection. He said it slowly, carefully, like explaining something to a child. Why do you think I married you, Serafina? Out of kindness? Because I felt sorry for the daughter of a dead bookbinder? The floor felt unstable beneath her feet. You told me my father worked for you, that he was valuable, that protecting me was the right thing to do. I lied. 2 words. That's all it took to unravel everything. Serafina's breath stopped. What? Your father wasn't valuable to me. He was dangerous. He knew things, saw things, documented things he shouldn't have documented. Luca's voice stayed level, matter of fact, like he was discussing business instead of destroying what little foundation her life had left. When he died, you inherited his knowledge whether you knew it or not. That made you dangerous too. So you married me to, what, keep me quiet? I married you to keep you alive. The distinction should have mattered, should have felt different. Somehow it didn't. By turning me into a prisoner, she whispered. By making you untouchable. Luca's expression didn't change. You don't understand how this world works. The moment your father died, you had a target on your back. Every family in Chicago knew he'd been collecting information, evidence. They all wanted to know what he'd told you, what he'd left you, what you might know about their operations. The only thing that kept you breathing was my name attached to yours. Serafina felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart exactly. More like the last piece of armor she'd been using to protect herself from the truth she'd been avoiding for almost a year. So this whole time, she said slowly, you've been keeping me alive because I'm a liability. I've been keeping you alive because I chose to. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. She stared at him. This man she'd married. This stranger wearing a wedding ring that matched hers. This monster that the city feared, who spoke about murder like it was business and looked at her like she was a problem that required management instead of a person who required care. Did you ever love me? The question came out quieter than she intended, smaller, more vulnerable than she wanted to sound. Luca didn't hesitate. No. The word landed like a physical blow. Clean, final, more painful than anything he could have done with his hands. Serafina felt something inside her shatter, not dramatically, not like glass breaking, more like ice cracking under weight it was never meant to hold, quiet, inevitable, irreversible. Okay, she whispered. Okay? That's all I needed to know. She turned toward the door. Her legs felt distant, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. Luca didn't move to stop her, didn't call her name, didn't offer explanation or apology or anything that might have made this hurt less. She was halfway across the room when he finally spoke. Where are you going? Does it matter? Don't be dramatic. That stopped her. She turned back, and for the first time in 11 months, Serafina let him see the rage beneath her carefully maintained calm. Dramatic? Her voice shook. You just told me our entire marriage was a cage you built to keep me contained. You told me you never loved me. You told me I'm nothing but a problem you're managing, and you think I'm being dramatic? You're being emotional. I'm being human. Sorry if that's inconvenient for you. Luca's expression finally shifted. Not guilt exactly, more like irritation that she wasn't playing her role correctly anymore. You need to calm down, he said No, I really don't. Serafina, I'm leaving. You're not. Watch me. She yanked open the study door and walked into the hallway before he could respond. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was fury and grief and relief all tangled together into something that felt like freedom and terror at the same time. Behind her, she heard Luca move, footsteps on marble, coming after her. Serafina, stop! She didn't. She made it to the grand staircase before his hand closed around her wrist. Not painful, just firm enough to hold her in place. Let go, she said without turning around. We're not done talking. Yes? We are. I'm not letting you walk out in the middle of the night with no protection. I don't want your protection anymore. She wrenched her arm free and faced him fully. I don't want this house. I don't want this life. I don't want to be a problem you're managing or a liability you're controlling or a possession you're keeping safe in a cage you pretend is marriage. You're being reckless. Good. I'm tired of being careful. You'll be dead in a week. Then I'll die free. The words came out raw and true and terrifying. Serafina saw something flicker in Luca's eyes. Shock, maybe, or respect, or the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him in months. But it didn't matter. She turned and descended the stairs, moving faster now, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Down through the foyer, past the bodyguards who watched with carefully blank expressions. Through the front door into rain that soaked through her clothes instantly, cold enough to steal breath. The night swallowed her whole. Behind her, the Moretti estate blazed with lights, standing against the Chicago skyline like a fortress made of money and murder. Serafina didn't look back. She walked through the rain until her apartment building appeared like salvation carved from old brick and iron fire escapes. Climbed 5 flights of stairs with legs that barely held her weight. Unlocked her real door, to her real apartment, the place she'd kept even after marrying Luca because some part of her had known she'd need an escape route eventually. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Small, cramped. Hers. The restoration studio took up half the space. Work tables covered in tools and half-finished manuscripts, shelves lined with damaged books waiting for repair. Her father's work. Her work. The only thing she'd ever been good at besides surviving. Serafina locked the door behind her and slid down against it, finally letting the tears come. She cried for the marriage that never was, for the protection that felt like imprisonment, for the father she'd lost and the husband who'd never actually been hers, and the life she'd traded away because fear had made her desperate. When the tears finally stopped, she noticed the leather document tube leaning against her workbench. Her father's tube. She'd grabbed it when she'd packed a bag after the wedding, thinking it contained his restoration notes or client records. She'd never actually opened it. Never looked inside because looking inside meant accepting he was really gone. Serafina pushed herself off the floor and crossed to the workbench. Her hands were steadier now. Cried out. Wrung dry. She uncapped the tube and tipped it upside down. A single book slid out. Small, old, leather binding damaged by water and time. The cover was blank, but when she opened it carefully, she recognized her father's handwriting immediately. Not notes exactly, more like records, dates, names, numbers that looked like payments or coordinates or codes she didn't understand. Her father had been a bookbinder, a restoration specialist who worked for clients across the city, including several Moretti family associates. Simple work. Honest work. Except this book suggested nothing about his work had been simple at all. Serafina turned pages carefully, her restoration training taking over even as her mind raced. The handwriting was meticulous, organized, methodical. Her father had been documenting something, recording it, preserving it the way he'd preserved manuscripts and histories and fragile texts that needed to survive. Halfway through the book, she found a page that made her hands start shaking again. Names. Not just any names. Moretti names, capos, underbosses, soldiers, all listed with dates and locations and details that looked like evidence, she whispered. Her father had been building a case against the Moretti family, against Luca's entire organization, and he'd hidden it inside a damaged book, disguised as something worthless, something no one would look twice at unless they understood restoration and knew how to read between deteriorated pages. Thunder cracked outside. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Serafina pressed her palm against the book's cover, feeling the texture of leather that had survived decades, and her father's death and her own desperate flight from the life he'd tried to warn her about. Luca had been right about one thing. She had inherited her father's knowledge. She just hadn't known it until now. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. In the hallway outside her door. Slow, deliberate, multiple sets. Serafina's breath stopped. She looked at the door, locked, but apartment locks meant nothing to men who knew how to break them. Looked at the fire escape, rusted shut years ago, never repaired because she'd never needed an emergency exit before tonight. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Someone knocked. Not police. Police announced themselves. Not Luca's men. They would have just walked in. Serafina Val. The voice came through the door, low and unfamiliar. We know you're in there. We know what you took. Open the door, and maybe we let you walk away. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed the book, shoved it back in the leather tube, looked around desperately for somewhere to hide it. The door exploded inward. 3 men poured through the splintered frame. Not Moretti soldiers. Wrong suits, wrong weapons, wrong faces, rivals. The Bellucci family, probably, or one of the other organizations that had been circling the Moretti territory like sharks for years. The lead man smiled. There she is? Serafina backed toward the window, clutching the document tube against her chest. I don't know what you want. Yes, you do. He stepped closer. Your father was smart, kept records, evidence. The kind of evidence that could burn down the Moretti Empire if it ended up in the right hands. We want those hands to be ours. I don't have anything. Don't lie. We've been watching. We know exactly what you just pulled out of that tube. Her pulse roared in her ears. She calculated distances. Door blocked. Window 5 stories up. No weapons, no training, no way out. What makes you think I'd help you? She managed. The man laughed. Because Luca Moretti never loved you. He told you that tonight, didn't he? Right before you walked out. We have people inside his organization. We know everything. The words hit like stones. They'd been listening, watching, waiting for this exact moment. So here's what happens now, the man continued. You give us the records. We use them to destroy the Morettis. You walk away clean, free. No more cage, no more marriage to a man who sees you as property. You want it out. This is out. Serafina's grip tightened on the tube. Her father had died protecting this information, died keeping it hidden from men exactly like these. She thought about Luca's cold face when he'd said no. Thought about 11 months of loneliness and fear. Thought about Marco's white face tonight when he'd begged for mercy, and the casual way Luca had granted it like life and death were just choices he made before breakfast. Then she thought about her father. The way he'd taught her restoration with patient hands and careful words. The way he'd trusted her with his life's work, even after he was gone. No, she said. The man's smile dropped. Wrong answer. He moved fast. But Serafina was already moving, diving sideways, grabbing the nearest thing within reach, a heavy restoration press made of iron and wood, and swinging it with every ounce of strength she had. It caught the man across the side of his head with a wet crack that made her stomach roll. He dropped. The other 2 lunged forward. She threw the press at them and ran, not toward the door, but toward the back corner where her father's old workspace still stood. The floor was loose there. She'd noticed it months ago and never bothered fixing it. Her fingers found the edge of the floorboard and yanked. It came up. The space underneath was just wide enough. She shoved the document tube into the darkness, slammed the board back down, and barely got upright before hands grabbed her hair and slammed her face first into the wall. Pain exploded across her cheek. Where is it? Someone snarled in her ear. I don't... He slammed her into the wall again. Blood filled her mouth. Where? Gunfire exploded through the apartment, not from inside, from outside, from the hallway. The man holding her jerked once, twice, then collapsed, pulling her down with him. Serafina hit the floor hard, tangled in dead weight and her own shock, ears ringing from gunfire in an enclosed space. Through the broken doorway, more figures appeared. These ones she recognized. Roman DeLuca moved like controlled thunder, weapon raised, face blank with professional violence. Behind him came 6 more Moretti soldiers, fanning out through the apartment with the efficiency of men who'd cleared rooms before. And behind them all stood Luca. His suit was soaked from rain. Blood spattered across his collar. His eyes swept the apartment, cataloging damage and bodies, and Serafina on the floor, with a dead man's arm still draped across her shoulders. "Clear the room," he said quietly. The soldiers moved instantly, dragging bodies toward the door, checking corners, securing the space. Roman crossed to Serafina and pulled her upright with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands had probably killed more people than she could count. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. Her face throbbed. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Take her downstairs," Luca said, not looking at her. "Full medical exam. Then bring her to the car." "Boss?" Roman started. "Do it." Roman glanced between them, reading something in Luca's tone that made him nod once and guide Serafina toward the door with a hand on her elbow. She looked back once. Luca stood in the middle of her destroyed apartment, surrounded by broken furniture and bullet holes and blood, staring at the place where she'd built the only life she'd ever truly owned. Then she was in the hallway, moving downstairs that seemed endless, Roman's presence beside her solid and silent. Outside, more SUVs lined the street. Armed men stood in the rain like they were guarding a war zone. Maybe they were. A man in a white coat examined her face under the harsh interior light of one of the vehicles, checking her pupils, her jaw, asking questions she answered automatically while her mind spiraled through what had just happened. Luca had come for her, despite everything, despite the fight, despite her walking out. He'd come. The car door opened. Luca slid in beside her without a word. He smelled like rain and gunpowder. Roman got in front. The SUV pulled away from the curb. Silence filled the vehicle like something physical. Serafina stared out the window, watching Chicago scroll past in streaks of light and shadow. Finally, Luca spoke. "They'll come back." She didn't answer. "The Belluccis know you have something. They won't stop until they get it or eliminate the problem permanently." "I'm not your problem anymore," she said quietly. "You're my wife." "You said you never loved me." "I said I didn't love you when we married. I didn't say anything about now." The words hit like a gut punch. Serafina turned to look at him. His profile was hard in the passing streetlights, carved from shadow and old violence, but his jaw was tight. His hands were clenched. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Luca finally looked at her. For the first time in 11 months, she saw something raw behind his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "I'm saying you're not leaving again," he said quietly. "Not until this is finished. Not until you're safe." "And then?" "Then we figure out what the hell we're doing." It wasn't a confession, wasn't a promise, but coming from Luca Moretti, it was something close to honesty. The SUV pulled through the gates of the estate. Rain drummed against the roof. Guards flanked the entrance, weapons visible, eyes scanning the darkness for threats that were already inside. Serafina felt the weight of the book she'd hidden beneath loose floorboards in her apartment, felt the weight of secrets that had killed her father and would probably kill her too if she wasn't careful. But as Luca helped her out of the vehicle with hands that were almost gentle, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to run anymore. She wanted answers. And the only man who could help her find them was the same man who just admitted he might actually care whether she lived or died. Thunder cracked overhead as they walked toward the house together, not touching, but somehow closer than they'd been in months. Behind them, Roman spoke quietly into his phone, coordinating security, arranging protection, preparing for the war they all knew was coming. Because men like the Belluccis didn't stop, and evidence like what Serafina's father had collected didn't stay hidden forever. Inside the estate, Luca led her through familiar hallways toward an unfamiliar door. He unlocked it personally, not with a key, but with a code punched into a digital pad that suggested serious security. The door opened into a private wing she'd never seen before. "What is this?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." He stepped inside and waited for her to follow. "No one comes here without my permission. You'll have everything you need: medical supplies, food, space to breathe." Serafina looked at the room. Luxury disguised as protection. A cage that looked like sanctuary. For how long? Until we find out what they're really after. She met his eyes. "What if I already know?" His expression sharpened. "Explain." "My father left me a book." "What kind of book?" "The kind that gets people killed." Luca's jaw tightened. He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "Where is it?" he asked quietly. "Hidden." "Where?" "Safe. Serafina's. You want my trust?" She lifted her chin. "Earn it. Help me figure out what my father died protecting. Help me understand why people are trying to kill me for information I don't even fully understand yet. Do that, and maybe I'll stop seeing you as the monster everyone says you are." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go back to your apartment, we find the book, and then we figure out exactly who we're fighting." "We? You're my wife. That makes your war mine." The words should have felt possessive. Instead, they felt like the first honest thing he'd said since she met him. Luca turned toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said without looking back, "I lied earlier too." "About what?" "When I said I never loved you." His voice dropped lower. "I said I didn't love you when we married. That was true. But somewhere between protection and possession, something changed. I just didn't know what to do with it." Then he walked out, leaving her alone in a room that was either sanctuary or prison, depending on which way she chose to see it. Serafina sank onto the bed and pressed her hands against her face, feeling the bruise blooming across her cheekbone, the dried blood at the corner of her mouth, the exhaustion that went bone deep. Outside, rain continued to fall. And somewhere in her apartment, beneath loose floorboards, her father's book waited with secrets that might destroy them all. Sleep didn't come. Serafina lay on top of the covers in the private wing, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at ceiling molding that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. Her cheek throbbed where it had connected with the wall. Her ribs ached from hitting the floor. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the noise inside her head. Luca's voice kept looping. Somewhere between protection and possession, something changed. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. Didn't help. The words were still there, burrowed under her skin like shrapnel. She couldn't dig out. Dawn came gray and cold through windows she couldn't open. Rain had stopped, but the sky looked bruised, threatening more. Serafina pushed herself upright, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders, and found clothes laid out on a chair she hadn't noticed last night. Black pants, black sweater, practical. Someone's idea of tactical dressing for women who'd recently survived home invasions. She showered in a bathroom with heated floors and water pressure that felt like assault. Dressed, avoided looking at her reflection because the bruise spreading across her cheekbone looked worse in daylight, purple bleeding into yellow, swollen enough that her eye was half shut. When she opened the bedroom door, Roman DeLuca stood in the hallway like he'd been planted there overnight. "You sleep?" he asked. "No." "Good. Means you're smart." He gestured toward the stairs. "Boss wants you in the kitchen. You eat, then we move." The kitchen was all white marble and stainless steel, designed by someone who'd never actually cooked a meal. Luca sat at the island counter with espresso and a tablet, reading something that made his jaw tight. He looked up when she entered. His gaze went straight to her face. Something flickered in his eyes, guilt maybe, or anger, before the mask slammed back down. "Sit," he said. Not a request. Serafina sat. A woman she'd never seen before, 50s, gray hair pulled back, face that suggested she'd seen worse things than bruised wives, placed food in front of her. Eggs, toast, fruit that looked too perfect to be real. "Eat," Luca said, still watching her. "You'll need your strength." She picked up a fork, put it down. Her stomach felt like a clenched fist. "I'm not hungry." "I don't care. Eat anyway." "Stop giving me orders. Stop being stubborn." They stared at each other across expensive countertop. Roman coughed quietly from his position near the door, probably to remind them they had an audience. Luca broke first. He pushed the tablet away and leaned forward, elbows on marble, hands clasped like he was trying to physically hold himself together. "We're going back to your apartment in 30 minutes, he said quietly. "You're going to show me where you hid the book. I'm going to read it. Then we're going to figure out exactly what kind of war your father was building evidence for. And if I don't want to show you, then people keep dying until someone finds it anyway. Your choice." The words landed cold and factual. No threat, just reality laid out like breakfast dishes. Serafina picked up the fork again and forced down eggs that tasted like nothing. Luca watched her eat with the same intensity he probably used to watch negotiations or executions. When she finished, he stood. "Let's go." The drive back to her apartment happened in an SUV with windows tinted dark enough to hide bodies. Roman drove. 2 more vehicles flanked them front and back, filled with men carrying enough firepower to start a small war. Serafina stared out at Chicago scrolling past. Morning traffic, people going to work. Normal lives happening while hers spiraled into violence she still didn't fully understand. "They'll have people watching," she said quietly. Luca didn't look up from his phone. "I know." "So walking in there is necessary." He finally met her eyes. "You think I'd bring you back here if I wasn't prepared?" "I think you make decisions based on control, not safety." His mouth tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You married me to control a situation. You kept me isolated to control information. Now you're bringing me back to a crime scene to control evidence. Everything you do is about control. Everything I do is about survival." His voice stayed level, but something sharp cut through underneath. "You want to judge my methods? Fine. But those methods kept you breathing for 11 months while every other family in this city wanted you dead. So maybe consider that before you lecture me about control." Serafina bit down on her response. He wasn't wrong. Didn't make him right either. The SUV pulled up outside her building. Her stomach dropped. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Yellow tape crisscrossed the entrance. Police had been here. Crime scene investigators, probably. Maybe even media. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Too late now." Luca opened his door and stepped out into gray morning light. "Stay close to me. Don't talk to anyone. Don't touch anything until I say so." Roman appeared at her elbow, guiding her out of the vehicle with a hand that was firm but not rough. The street had cleared, Moretti soldiers forming a perimeter, weapons concealed but ready. Neighbors who'd probably started toward their cars took one look at the men in dark suits and retreated back inside. Fear had a smell. Serafina could taste it in the air. They climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the 5th floor landing, her breath came short and fast, but not from exertion. From memory, from the sound of her door exploding inward and hands in her hair and blood filling her mouth. Luca's hand touched her lower back. Just pressure, just presence. "Breathe," he said quietly. She did. Once, twice. Then she stepped through the doorway into wreckage. The apartment looked worse in daylight. Bullet holes punched through walls. Blood stained the floorboards. Some hers, some from the men who'd attacked, some from the men who'd saved her. Her furniture was overturned, books scattered, tools broken. Her father's workspace in the back corner stood untouched. The floorboard she'd yanked up still sat flush with the others, hiding what lay beneath. "There," she said, pointing. Luca crossed the room in 4 strides, knelt, examined the floor with the same careful attention he gave everything. His fingers found the edge of the loose board and lifted. The space underneath was empty. Serafina's heart stopped. "It was there," she whispered. "I swear it was right there." "It's gone." Luca's voice came out flat. "Dead." He stood slowly, turning to face her with an expression that made ice crawl up her spine. "Who else knew about this hiding spot?" "No one. I swear." "Oh." "Someone knew." "Luca, I'm telling you, did you tell anyone?" He moved closer. "Before last night, after, any time. Did you mention the book to anyone?" "No." "Think harder." "I didn't." Her breath caught. "Wait." His eyes sharpened. "What?" "The Bellucci men, last night. They said they'd been watching. They knew what I pulled out of the tube before." The realization hit like cold water. "They must have come back. After you left. After we left. They came back and—" "Impossible," Roman spoke from the doorway. "We had men posted all night. No one got past our perimeter." Silence fell heavy enough to crush. Luca's jaw worked. "Which means it wasn't the Belluccis." "Then who?" "Someone on the inside." He said it quiet, certain. "Someone in my organization." The words hung in the air like smoke before fire. Roman moved into the room, face carefully blank. "Boss, that's not—" "Check everyone who was here last night. Everyone who knew we were coming back this morning. Everyone who had access to this building in the last 12 hours. Luca's voice stayed calm, but violence lived just beneath the surface. Find out who took it. If someone inside, Roman started. Then I want names. Luca turned back to Serafina. His eyes were smoke and winter. You're sure it was in there? You didn't move it. Didn't hide it somewhere else? I'm sure. You swear on your father's memory. The question felt like a knife. Yes. He stared at her for another 5 seconds, reading her face like he could see lies, the way other people saw eye color. Then he nodded once. We're leaving. But now. Back in the SUV, back into motion. But this time, the silence felt different, heavier. Luca made 3 phone calls in Italian, voice low and sharp. Words Serafina couldn't fully translate, but tone she understood perfectly. Someone was going to pay for this. They didn't go back to the estate. Instead, the convoy headed north, into neighborhoods that got progressively rougher until warehouses replaced houses and industrial decay replaced anything resembling normal life. The SUV pulled through a gate into a facility that looked abandoned from the outside, but revealed itself to be anything but once they were inside. Men moved through the space with purpose. Weapons, vehicles, communications equipment that looked military grade. What is this place? Serafina asked. Somewhere we can have conversations without being overheard. Luca got out and waited for her to follow. Come on. He led her through the warehouse to a back office that had been converted into something resembling a war room. Maps on the walls, photographs pinned in clusters, red string connecting faces and locations like spiderwebs. In the center sat a table with chairs and what looked like interrogation lighting. Luca pulled out a chair for her. Sit. She sat. He remained standing, hands braced on the table, looking down at her with an intensity that made her want to run and stay at the same time. Tell me everything your father did in the months before he died, he said. I already told you. Tell me again. Every detail, every client, every conversation you remember, everything. So she did. She talked about the restoration work, the manuscripts he'd been hired to repair for various families across Chicago, the way he'd started working longer hours, the way he'd stopped smiling, the night she'd found him burning papers in the kitchen sink, hands shaking, eyes red like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. Luca listened without interrupting. When she finished, he straightened and started pacing. He was documenting something, Luca said, more to himself than to her. Building a case. But against who? The whole organization? Specific players? I don't know. Your father worked for multiple families, Moretti, Bellucci, Russo. Even some of the smaller operations. He had access. Luca stopped pacing and looked at her. He could move between territories without raising suspicion because restoration work is neutral, valuable. Everyone needs books preserved, documents maintained, histories kept. He was perfect. Perfect for what? For intelligence gathering. He said it simply. Your father was either working with law enforcement or building leverage for himself. Either way, he was collecting evidence that could destroy half the criminal infrastructure in Chicago. Serafina's throat tightened. He never said anything. Of course not. Telling you would have made you a target. Luca resumed pacing, hands moving as he thought. So he keeps everything hidden in a book, uses his restoration skills to conceal it where no one would think to look. Then he dies. How? The question burst out before she could stop it. How did he die? Luca stopped moving. You were told it was a car accident. I'm asking what actually happened. For a long moment, he didn't answer, just looked at her with something that might have been pity if he was capable of that emotion. He was found in his car at the bottom of the Chicago River, Luca said finally. Brakes failed. Steering locked. Engine still running when divers pulled him out 3 days later. Accident, she whispered. Murder made to look like accident. The room tilted. Serafina gripped the edge of the table, feeling the world shift underneath her feet. She'd known. Deep down, somewhere beneath grief and denial, she'd always known. But hearing it confirmed felt like dying. Who? She managed. I don't know. But whoever killed him wanted it clean, professional. The kind of hit that doesn't raise questions because everyone assumes mechanical failure instead of murder. And you married me knowing this. I married you because of this. His voice stayed level. Your father's death wasn't random. Someone silenced him before he could use whatever evidence he'd collected. But they didn't know where he'd hidden it. So they waited, watched you, hoped you'd lead them to it eventually. You used me as bait. I kept you alive long enough to matter. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. The words came out sharp enough to cut. Lucas slammed his palm against the table, making her jump. You want me to apologize for keeping you breathing? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I married you under false pretenses. I'm sorry I kept you isolated. I'm sorry I never explained the rules of a game you didn't even know you were playing. But I'm not sorry you're still alive. Silence crashed between them. Serafina stared at this man she'd married, this monster who looked at her like she was something worth saving even while admitting he'd used her survival as strategy. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we figure out who took the book. And then? Then we decide whether we're burning it or using it. Using it how? His smile had no warmth in it. Leverage, evidence, ammunition, depending on who wants it and why. A knock interrupted them. Roman stepped inside, face grim. We've got a problem, he said. Luca's jaw tightened. Talk. Adrian Knox is missing. The name meant nothing to Serafina, but the way Luca's entire body went still suggested it meant everything to him. Define missing, Luca said quietly. Hasn't checked in since last night. Missed 2 scheduled calls. His apartment's empty. Car's gone. Family? Daughters at school. Wife's at work. Both under surveillance. Neither one knows where he is. Luca's hands clenched into fists. Adrian was here last night. He was part of the team that cleared Serafina's apartment after the attack. Understanding hit like ice water. Adrian Knox had access. He'd been inside her apartment. He'd known about the floorboard because he'd been there when it mattered. He took it, Serafina whispered. Looks that way. Roman's voice stayed level, but fury lived underneath. Question is whether he took it for himself or if someone got to him first. Find him. Luca's voice dropped to something cold and final. I don't care how. Use every resource we have. Check every contact, every property, every person he's ever spoken to. I want Adrian Knox in front of me in the next 12 hours or people start losing things they value. Roman nodded once and disappeared. Serafina stood on legs that felt distant. What does this mean? It means someone inside my organization just declared war. Luca moved to the maps on the wall, studying them like battle plans. Adrian's been with me for 8 years, loyal, effective, smart. If he turned, there's a reason. Money? Threat. Someone got to his family, made him choose between loyalty and love. He traced a finger along one of the red strings connecting photographs. Classic play. Find the weakness. Exploit it. Turn a trusted soldier into a weapon aimed at your enemy. Who would do that? Anyone smart enough to see an opening. He turned back to her. The Belluccis. The Russos. Hell, could be someone inside my own family making a move. Your family would betray you? His laugh was bitter. My family invented betrayal. My father built this empire on the bodies of brothers who trusted him. My uncle disappeared the same year I took over. My cousin tried to poison me during Christmas dinner when I was 23. Family loyalty is a story we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. Reality is everyone's one good offer away from turning. The words painted a picture of a world Serafina still didn't fully understand. A world where blood meant nothing, and violence was currency, and trust was just temporary alignment of interests. So what do we do? She asked. We find Adrian, we get the book back, and then he stopped. His phone was ringing. He looked at the screen and his face changed. Stay here. He stepped out of the room. Serafina heard his voice through the door, low, sharp Italian vowels twisted into fury. Then silence. When he came back, something in his expression made her stomach drop. What happened? They found Adrian's car, Luca said quietly. Empty. Blood on the driver's seat, signs of struggle. He's dead? No body, which means he's either in hiding or someone's holding him. The book? Gone with him, if he still has it. Luca's jaw worked. We're running out of time. Every minute that book's in the wind is another minute someone's reading evidence that could destroy everything I've built. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. He looked at her like she'd grown a second head. What? Your empire. Your organization. Maybe it deserves to burn. You don't mean that. Don't I? She stepped closer, finding courage she didn't know she had. You just admitted your family's built on betrayal and murder. You told me my father was killed for trying to expose the truth. Now you're worried about protecting the same criminals who murdered him. So yeah, maybe I do mean it. Luca crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make her breath catch. You think burning it all down makes you noble? He asked quietly. You think destroying my organization brings your father back? Makes you clean? It makes me honest. It makes you dead. He leaned closer. The second that evidence goes public, every family in this city will know you had it. They'll assume you've read it. They'll assume you know things, and they won't take chances. They'll kill you quick and quiet, and no one will ever find your body. You'd let that happen? I'd die trying to stop it. The words hung in the air between them, raw and true and terrifying. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. Why? Because somewhere between protection and possession, I stopped being able to imagine a world where you don't exist in it. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Roman stood in the frame, breathing hard, phone in hand. We've got movement. Bellucci soldiers just hit 3 of our locations simultaneously. Warehouses, safe houses. They're looking for something. The book, Luca said. That's what I'm thinking. They know it's out there. They know Adrian has it. They're tearing apart the city trying to find him before we do. Luca turned to Serafina. His eyes were smoke and determination. You're staying here. Full security. No one gets in without my clearance. Where are you going? To have a conversation with the Belluccis about respecting territory. You mean you're going to kill people, if I have to? He moved toward the door, then stopped. Looked back. For what it's worth, I wish your father had told you everything. Wish he'd trusted you enough to bring you into this willingly. But he didn't. So now you're stuck in the middle of a war you never asked for, married to a man who can't figure out how to keep you safe without making you hate him. That's my failure, not yours. Then he was gone. Serafina stood in the empty war room, surrounded by maps and photographs and evidence of violence she'd never fully understand. Through the walls, she heard men moving, weapons being loaded, vehicles starting, the machinery of organized crime preparing for battle. Roman appeared in the doorway. You need anything? Information, she said. About Adrian Knox. His eyes narrowed. Why? Because if he took the book, he had a reason. And maybe that reason is something I can understand better than Luca can. For a long moment, Roman didn't answer. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. A photograph appeared. A man in his 40s. Tired eyes. Wedding ring. Standing beside a young girl, maybe 12, with braces and her father's smile. That's Adrian, Roman said quietly. Wife Sarah, daughter Emily, normal family, normal life. He kept them separate from the business as much as he could. But someone found them anyway. Everyone finds everyone eventually. That's the rule. Serafina studied the photograph. The girl's smile, the father's protective hand on her shoulder. The ordinary suburban background that suggested a life nowhere near warehouses and violence. If someone threatened his daughter, she said slowly, Adrian would do anything to protect her. Yeah. Even betray Luca. Even that. She looked up at Roman. So we don't find Adrian by searching the city. We find him by figuring out who has leverage over his family. Roman's expression shifted. You think like your father. Is that a compliment? Depends whether it gets you killed or not. He pocketed his phone. I'll make some calls, see if anyone's been sniffing around Knox's family in the last week. You stay put. Boss finds out I let you get involved. He'll kill me before the Belluccis get a chance. He left. Serafina sank into a chair and pressed her hands against her face. The bruise on her cheek throbbed. Her ribs ached. Everything hurt. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Determination. Her father had died protecting evidence hidden in a book. Adrian Knox had stolen that book to protect his daughter. And somewhere in this city, Someone was pulling strings that made grown men choose between loyalty and love. She needed to find out who. Hours crawled past. Roman brought her food she didn't eat. Coffee she drank until her hands shook from caffeine instead of fear. Through the windows, gray daylight faded into gray evening. Rain started again, soft at first, then building into the kind of downpour that turned streets into rivers. Luca returned after dark. Blood spattered his collar, his knuckles were split. He looked like violence given human form, and when his eyes found her across the warehouse, something in his expression made her chest tighten. "We need to talk," he said. She followed him back to the war room. He closed the door, leaned against it like he needed physical support. "The Belluccis don't have the book," he said quietly. "I made that very clear in ways they'll remember for a long time. But they knew about it. Someone told them." "Who?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." He pushed off the door and crossed to the table, pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "This isn't just about the book anymore, Serafina. This is about someone orchestrating a war, using your father's evidence as kindling, turning my own soldiers against me, trying to tear apart my organization from the inside. Maybe you deserve it." He looked at her, just looked, with eyes that had seen too much and somehow still held traces of something almost human. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. "But you don't. And neither does Adrian's daughter. And neither do the 100 other people who'll die if this city turns into a war zone because someone wanted power badly enough to burn everything down to get it." Serafina pulled out the chair across from him and sat. "So what do we do?" "We find out who's really pulling the strings." He leaned forward. "Someone powerful enough to turn my own men, smart enough to cover their tracks, patient enough to wait 11 months for the perfect moment to strike. Who has that kind of reach? Inside my organization?" His jaw tightened. 3 people. Vincent Ardelli, my oldest advisor. Marcus Santino handles finances, and Roman DeLuca. Her heart stopped. "Roman? He's been with me since the beginning, knows everything, has access to everything." Luca's voice stayed level, but pain lived underneath. "If this is an inside job, Roman's the perfect candidate." "You don't believe that." "I don't want to believe it, but wanting doesn't change facts." Silence fell heavy. Then Serafina said the thing she'd been thinking for hours. "What if it's not about power?" Luca's eyes sharpened. "Explain. You said Adrian betrayed you to protect his daughter. What if whoever's orchestrating this isn't doing it for power or money or territory? What if they're doing it for revenge?" He went very still. "Against who?" "Against you. Against your family. Against everything the Morettis represent." She leaned forward. "My father spent years collecting evidence, building a case. He wasn't working for another crime family. He was working against all of them. What if someone else had the same idea? What if someone's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment, the right leverage, the right circumstances to take everything down?" "That's a long game. Long enough to be invisible." Her mind was racing now, connections forming. "Think about it. Adrian doesn't just steal the book randomly. Someone approaches him, threatens his daughter, gives him no choice. But whoever did that knew Adrian would be at my apartment that night, knew he'd have access, knew exactly when and how to make him desperate enough to betray you." Luca's expression shifted, which means they've been watching, planning, waiting for variables to align. And my father's death 11 months ago wasn't random either. Someone killed him before he could use the evidence. Then they waited, watched me, waited for me to find the book, waited for it to surface at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. Jesus Christ. Luca stood abruptly, chair scraping against concrete. "This whole thing's been orchestrated from the beginning. Not just orchestrated, weaponized. Someone's been building toward this for years." He started pacing again, movements sharp with controlled violence. "If you're right, if this is revenge, then whoever's behind it has to have history with my family. Has to have been hurt badly enough to spend years planning retribution. Who fits that description? Too many people. My father made enemies the way other people make breakfast. I've made more." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "But if this is about revenge specifically aimed at destroying me, then it has to be someone who knows me, understands how I think, knows my weaknesses." "Like what?" His eyes locked on hers. "Like you." The words landed like gut punch. "You think this is about me?" she whispered. I think marrying you made me vulnerable in ways I didn't anticipate. I think whoever's orchestrating this saw that vulnerability and decided to exploit it. Your father's evidence, your safety, your presence in my life. It's all leverage aimed at one specific target. You. Me. Thunder cracked outside. Rain hammered harder against the warehouse roof. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. Voices called out. Footsteps moved with urgency. Roman appeared in the doorway. His face was white. Boss, he said, we found Adrian. Luca's entire body tensed. Where? St. Monica Medical Center, emergency room. Someone dropped him off 30 minutes ago. Roman's voice shook. He's been tortured. Bad. He's asking for you. They moved fast, back into SUVs, back into rain-slicked streets with Chicago blurring past in streaks of light and shadow. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Luca sat rigid, jaw clenched, hands fisted on his thighs. The hospital emerged from darkness like a beacon. They parked in emergency lanes, ignoring protocols. Hospital security took one look at the men in dark suits and decided somewhere else needed their attention more. Inside, fluorescent lights burned too bright. The smell of antiseptic and fear. A doctor approached, young, terrified, probably wondering what kind of patient required this level of armed response. Adrian Knox, Luca said quietly. Where is he? Room 4, but he's in critical condition. You can't... Luca walked past like the man hadn't spoken. Room 4 was curtained off from the main emergency area. Behind the fabric, machines beeped steady rhythms. Someone breathed with a mechanical rasp that suggested ventilator support. Luca pulled back the curtain. Adrian Knox lay on his gurney, looking less like a man and more like something broken and reassembled wrong. His face was pulp. His hands were wrapped in bandages that couldn't hide the missing fingers. Tubes ran into his arms, machines breathed for him, but his eyes were open. And when he saw Luca, something like relief crossed the ruins of his face. Luca moved to the bedside. His expression was stone, but his voice shook. Who did this? Adrian tried to speak. The ventilator hissed. He reached up with his ruined hand, gesturing at the tube in his throat. The young doctor appeared. He can't talk with... Then take it out. Sir, he needs... Take it out. The doctor looked at Roman, who nodded once. The doctor's hands shook as he worked, removing tubes, adjusting equipment. Adrian gasped, coughed, gasped again. Blood flecked his lips. Emily, he managed. Voice like gravel, like screaming. They have Emily. Luca's face went white. Who? Don't know. Masks. Professional. Each word cost him. Said they'd kill her if I didn't, The book. Adrian nodded. Tears cut through blood on his cheeks. I'm sorry, boss. I'm so sorry. They took her from school. Said they'd send her back in pieces if I didn't. Where's the book now? Gave it to them. Dead drop. Industrial Park on South Side. He coughed again. Worse this time. They said they'd release her after. Said they'd let her go. I waited. She never came. They just kept... His voice broke. Luca's hand settled on Adrian's shoulder, gentle, the same hand that had probably killed dozens of people with brutal efficiency. We'll find her, Luca said quietly. I swear on everything I am, we'll find your daughter. Too late. Adrian's eyes were fading. They sent me a video. What they did to her. Oh God, boss, she was just 12 years old. She didn't... He stopped talking. The machine screamed. Doctors rushed in, pushing Luca aside, working with desperate efficiency. But Serafina could see the truth on their faces. Adrian Knox was already gone. Just a body with machines pretending it was still alive. Luca stood frozen, watching his soldier die. Then he turned and walked out of the room like death itself. Serafina followed. Down sterile hallways, through automatic doors, into rain that soaked them both instantly. Luca kept walking until they reached the SUV, then he stopped and screamed, raw, wordless. The sound of a man discovering that control meant nothing when the world decided to take pieces of your soul anyway. He slammed his fist against the vehicle. Once, twice, again and again, until his knuckles split and blood ran down his wrist and Roman grabbed him from behind. Boss, stop! You're hurting yourself. A 12-year-old girl. Luca wrenched free, spinning to face them with eyes that were nothing but rage and grief. They tortured a goddamn child to get to me. What kind of monsters are we fighting? No one answered, because they all knew. The kind of monsters that looked just like them. Serafina stepped forward. Rain ran down her face. Her voice came out steady despite the shaking in her chest. "We end this," she said. "Whatever it takes. Whoever's behind it. We find them, and we end them." Luca looked at her. Really looked, seeing something in her face that made his expression shift from rage to something darker, more determined. "You mean that? They killed my father. They tortured Adrian. They murdered a child. Yes, I mean it." He crossed to her in 3 strides. His bloody hands framed her face, thumbs gentle against her bruised cheek despite the violence still shaking through his body. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back. You'll be complicit, guilty, part of everything you've been condemning since the day we met. Then I guess we're both monsters now." Something in his eyes cracked, not breaking, opening, like she'd just said exactly the thing he'd needed to hear since the moment they'd met. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess we are." Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not careful, desperate and furious and tasting like rain and blood and every word they hadn't said in 11 months of careful distance. When they pulled apart, Serafina's heart was hammering and her breath came short, and the world had tilted into something new, something terrifying, something that felt like choosing violence instead of having it chosen for her. "We need to move," Roman said quietly from beside the SUV. "If they have the book, they have everything." Luca's voice was steady again, cold, focused. Names, routes, evidence. Enough to destroy half the criminal operations in Chicago if they know how to use it. "So what's our play?" Luca turned to look at the hospital, where Adrian Knox's body was probably already being cleaned and documented and prepared for whatever came after dying in service to violence. "We find Vincent Ardelli," he said quietly. "My advisor. The man who's been at my side since I took over. The man who knew about Serafina's father, who had access to Adrian, who's been in position to orchestrate everything from the shadows. You think it's him?" "I think it's time to ask." Luca's smile had no warmth in it. "And I think I'm done asking politely." They drove through rain-slicked streets to an estate on the north side that made the Moretti property look modest by comparison. Old money, old power, the kind of place that had survived generations by knowing when to bend and when to break. Vincent Ardelli's home. But when they arrived, the gates stood open. Lights blazed in every window, and the front door hung off its hinges like something had torn through it with inhuman strength. "Trap," Roman said immediately. "Probably." Luca opened his door anyway. "Let's find out." They moved through the entrance with weapons drawn. The house was silent except for rain hammering the roof. Furniture overturned, art shattered, signs of struggle everywhere. In the main study, they found Vincent, or what was left of him. He sat in his leather chair behind an antique desk, head tilted back at an angle that suggested broken spine. Blood pooled on expensive carpet, and pinned to his chest with a knife was a single page torn from a book. Luca crossed the room and pulled the page free. Serafina recognized her father's handwriting immediately. Names, dates, evidence, and at the top, written in different ink, fresher, newer. "The game begins now. Come find me if you're brave enough. She knows where." Luca turned the page toward Serafina. "What does that mean? She knows where?" Serafina's blood went cold, because she did know. The message wasn't for Luca. It was for her. And suddenly, 11 months of protection and isolation and careful distance made horrible, perfect sense. "The restoration studio," she whispered, "above St. Aurelia, where I worked before we married. That's where my father hid the real evidence." "But you said the book was a decoy, a test to see who would come for it." Her voice shook. "My father would never hide something that important in one place. He'd create layers, backups, insurance." Luca stared at her. "You've known this whole time?" "No, I swear I didn't." She stopped. Thought. "Wait, my father left me the apartment, left me the studio, left me everything in his will. But I never went through his things at the studio, never cleaned it out. I just I couldn't. Because grief made you avoid it. Or because he knew I'd avoid it, until I had no other choice. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and Serafina realized they were out of time. Whoever had orchestrated this, whoever had killed her father, turned Adrian, murdered Vincent Ardelli, they were already moving, already ahead, already waiting at the one place Serafina had refused to go for 11 months because the pain was too fresh and the memories too raw. Her father's workshop, where the real evidence waited, where the real battle was about to begin, and where Serafina would finally have to choose between justice and survival. The rain turned to ice somewhere between Vincent Ardelli's corpse and the restoration studio. Serafina watched sleet hammer the SUV windshield while her mind spiraled through possibilities she didn't want to consider. Her father's workshop, the place where he'd taught her to repair broken spines and restore damaged pages. The place she'd avoided for 11 months because walking through that door meant accepting he was really gone. Now it was the center of a war she still didn't fully understand. Luca sat beside her, jaw tight, phone pressed to his ear. He spoke Italian in clipped sentences that sounded like orders being given to soldiers preparing for battle. When he hung up, the silence felt heavier than the conversation. "We're going in blind," he said quietly. "No time for reconnaissance, no time for strategy. Whoever left that message wants us there now." "It's a trap," Roman said from the driver's seat. "Obviously. So we're walking into it anyway." "You have a better idea?" Roman's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Yeah. We burn the whole building down and whatever's inside with it. Cut our losses. Disappear until the smoke clears." Serafina's stomach dropped. "My father's work is in there. Years of restoration projects. Manuscripts that can't be replaced. Oh, will be ashes if we're not careful," Luca interrupted. His eyes stayed on her face. "Roman's not wrong. Going in there is suicide. But not going means leaving evidence in enemy hands. Evidence that could destroy everything." "Or free everything," she said quietly. His expression hardened. "You still think that's a good thing? After tonight? After Adrian and his daughter and Vincent bleeding out in his own study? I think maybe they died because of secrets, not in spite of them. Secrets keep people alive." "Secrets killed my father." The words hung between them like smoke. Luca's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. "Fine," he said finally. "We go in. We find whatever your father hid, and then we decide together what happens to it." Fair? Wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair, but it was the closest thing to compromise she'd get from a man who'd built an empire on control. "Fair," she whispered. The SUV pulled up outside a building Serafina had seen in nightmares for almost a year. Narrow, old brick. 5 stories of faded grandeur wedged between modern construction like a ghost refusing to leave. Ground floor was a closed antique shop. 2nd through 4th were apartments no one had lived in since the 80s. 5th floor was her father's restoration studio. Her studio now, technically. Left to her in a will that felt less like inheritance and more like burden. Rain, now sleet, hammered the street. 3 more vehicles flanked them, disgorging men in dark suits who moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers preparing for urban warfare. Roman barked orders in Italian. Weapons appeared. Positions were established. Luca opened Serafina's door personally. "Stay behind me. Don't touch anything until I clear it. If shooting starts, you hit the floor and you stay down. Understand? I'm not helpless." "I know, but you're also not bulletproof." His hand found her elbow, grip firm enough to steady but not restrain. "Please." The word caught her off guard. Luca Moretti didn't say please, didn't ask, didn't show vulnerability in his voice. "Okay," she managed. They moved toward the building entrance. The front door hung open, lock forced, hinges bent. Recent damage. Whoever had gone inside hadn't bothered with subtlety. Roman entered first, weapon raised, flashlight cutting through darkness. 2 more soldiers followed. Then Luca, pulling Serafina close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder blade. Fast. Controlled. Ready. The stairwell smelled like mold and old wood and something else. Copper. Blood, maybe. Or fear. Hard to tell the difference in places where violence lived. They climbed in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the third-floor landing, Serafina's breath came short and fast, but not from exertion, from memory. From the last time she'd climbed these stairs, the day after her father's funeral, when she'd stood outside the studio door for 20 minutes before walking away because opening it meant seeing his empty chair and his half-finished projects and proof that he was never coming back. Fifth floor. The studio door stood open. Light spilled into the hallway, warm yellow, like someone had turned on every lamp. Inviting. Wrong. Roman signaled. 2 soldiers moved through the doorway fast and low. Seconds passed like hours. Then Roman's voice called out, "Clear, but you need to see this, boss." Luca pulled Serafina through the door. The studio looked exactly as she remembered. Work tables covered in tools. Shelves lined with books in various states of repair. Her father's leather apron still hung on its hook beside the window. His reading glasses sat on the desk where he'd left them. Even his coffee mug remained on the windowsill, filled with months-old liquid that had probably turned to sludge. Except for one thing. In the center of the main work table, surrounded by carefully arranged restoration tools like some kind of ritual display, sat a leather-bound book. Not her father's prayer book. Not a decoy. This was old. Ancient, maybe. The binding was museum-quality work, restored with techniques Serafina recognized immediately because her father had taught her every single one. Gold leaf on the spine, hand-tooled leather, pages that looked like vellum, and sitting open to a page covered in her father's handwriting. Luca approached the table slowly. His weapon stayed raised. His eyes scanned every shadow, every corner, every place an ambush could be hiding. But the studio remained empty, just them and the ghosts of work left unfinished. Serafina moved to the table. Her hands shook as she reached for the book, then stopped. "It could be trapped." "Everything's trapped," Luca said quietly. But he holstered his weapon and examined the book without touching it. "Your father made this?" "The binding, yes. I recognize his work." She pointed to specific details. "See the way the leather's cut? The stitching pattern? That's his signature technique. He used to say restoration was about making broken things whole without erasing evidence of their damage. Poetic. Honest." She leaned closer. The page showed dates, names, transactions, more detailed than what had been in the prayer book. More comprehensive. "This is the real record. Everything my father collected. Years of evidence." "Against who?" She turned pages carefully. Each one revealed more. Moretti operations, Bellucci territory disputes, Russo family money laundering, but also other names. Names she didn't recognize. Politicians, police commissioners, federal judges, business owners. A network of corruption so extensive it made her head spin. "Everyone," she whispered. He documented everyone. Luca's face had gone pale. Jesus Christ, this isn't just criminal evidence. This is leverage against half the power structure in Chicago, which makes it the most dangerous thing in this city, which makes you the most dangerous person in this city for knowing it exists. The words landed cold. Serafina looked up and found Luca watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite fear, not quite respect, something that lived in the space between. "So what do we do?" she asked. Before he could answer, Roman's voice cut through the silence. "Boss, we've got company." Everyone moved at once, weapons raised, positions taken. Luca grabbed Serafina and pulled her behind the solid oak desk that had probably survived since the building was built. "How many?" Luca asked. Roman stood at the window, looking down at the street. 20, maybe more. 3 vehicles, armed, professional. "Which family?" "Can't tell. Wrong approach pattern for Bellucci's. Wrong vehicles for Russo's." "Then who?" The lights went out. Darkness slammed down like a physical thing. Emergency lighting flickered on, battery-powered, casting everything in sickly green. Through the windows, Chicago's skyline blazed with electricity. But this building, this block, had gone black. Someone had cut the power deliberately. "They're coming up," Roman said quietly. His voice stayed level, but tension ran underneath like current. "We need to move." "Where?" Luca's hand found Serafina's in the darkness. "We're 5 stories up with 1 exit and hostiles controlling the stairwell. Fire escape. Rusted shut. I checked when we arrived. Then we make a stand here." With a civilian in the middle of it? She stopped being civilian the moment she married you. The words should have felt like condemnation. Instead, they felt like acknowledgement, like Roman had just admitted Serafina belonged in this world of violence and strategy, whether she'd chosen it or not. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Multiple sets. Moving fast, but careful. Professional. Luca's grip on her hand tightened. Listen to me very carefully. When shooting starts, you stay behind this desk. You don't move. You don't make noise. You don't try to help. Understand? Luca shoots. Promise me. His voice cracked on the last word. Not much. Just enough that Serafina realized he was terrified. Not for himself. For her. I promise, she whispered. The footsteps reached the landing, then stopped. Silence stretched tight enough to snap. A voice called out from the hallway. Male. Unfamiliar. American accent with no trace of Italian heritage. Mr. Moretti. Mrs. Moretti. I know you're in there. I know what you found. And I know you're smart enough to realize fighting your way out isn't an option. Luca didn't answer. His weapon stayed trained on the doorway. The voice continued. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to have a conversation. A civilized one, if you'll allow it. About your father's work, Mrs. Moretti. About what it means. About what happens next. Serafina's breath caught. The man knew about her father, knew about the evidence, knew exactly why they were here. 3 minutes, the voice said. That's how long you have to decide whether this ends with conversation or bodies. Your choice. Luca looked at Roman. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Roman's face was stone, but his hands were steady on his weapon. What do you think? Luca asked quietly. I think we're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a room with no exit strategy. Roman's voice stayed flat. I think whoever that is has been planning this longer than we've been breathing, and I think if they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. So we talk. We listen. Difference. Luca turned to Serafina. In the green emergency lighting, his face looked carved from shadow. Stay behind me. If anything feels wrong, you run. Don't argue. Don't hesitate. Just run. Run where? Doesn't matter, just survive. Then he stood and called toward the doorway. You've got 2 minutes. Come in slowly. Hands visible. Anyone reaches for a weapon, this conversation ends permanently. A figure appeared in the doorway. Not what Serafina expected. The man was 60, maybe older. Gray hair cut military short. Expensive suit that looked government-issued. Face that suggested he'd seen violence from the comfortable distance of orders given instead of triggers pulled. He held his hands up, palms out, showing he carried no weapon. Behind him, more figures filled the hallway. Not mobsters, not hired muscle. Federal agents, body armor, FBI insignia. Weapons trained on the room with the kind of discipline that came from legitimate authority instead of criminal enterprise. Serafina's stomach dropped. This wasn't a gang war. This was a raid. The man in the suit stepped fully into the room. His eyes swept across the scene. Moretti soldiers in defensive positions, weapons drawn, faces showing the calculation of men deciding whether they could shoot their way through federal agents and survive. Stand down, the man said quietly. Not to Luca, to his own people. Nobody's getting shot tonight if we're smart about this. Who are you? Luca's voice stayed level, but fury lived underneath. Special Agent Martin Cross, FBI Organized Crime Division. He pulled out credentials and held them up. Real. Official. The kind of authority that made criminal empires crumble. And before you ask, yes, we've been investigating your organization for 3 years. Yes, we know about the evidence your father collected, Mrs. Moretti. And yes, we know you just found it approximately, he checked his watch, 11 minutes ago. You've been watching the studio, Serafina said, for 6 months, waiting for exactly this moment. Cross lowered his hand slowly. Your father approached us 2 years ago, said he had information, documentation, evidence that could dismantle organized crime infrastructure across Chicago. But he needed time, needed to make sure his work was complete, needed to make sure you were safe before he made his move. The words hit like stones. You're lying, Serafina whispered. Am I? Then explain how I know about the leather document tube, about the prayer book you found in your apartment. About Adrian Knox stealing a decoy while the real evidence sat here waiting for you to finally work up the courage to open your father's workshop. Her legs felt distant. The room tilted. He was working with you. My father was cooperating, yes, in exchange for protection, for immunity, for a guarantee that when this went public you wouldn't be implicated. Cross's expression softened slightly. He loved you very much, Mrs. Moretti. Every decision he made was about keeping you safe. Then why is he dead? The question burst out raw and furious. If you were protecting him, why did someone put his car in the river? Cross's jaw tightened. Because someone inside my organization leaked information about his cooperation. Someone warned the families. Your father died 3 days before he was supposed to enter witness protection. Inside job, Roman said quietly. Someone on your team sold him out. Yes, which is why I've spent the last 11 months trying to figure out who, while simultaneously watching Mrs. Moretti to see if she'd lead us to the evidence her father died protecting. Luca moved. Fast. 1 second he was standing still, the next his weapon was pressed against Cross's temple, thumb on the hammer, finger on the trigger. You used her as bait, Luca said quietly. Each word came out precise and cold. You knew she had no idea about the evidence. You knew she was vulnerable. And you let her walk around with a target on her back for almost a year while you played internal affairs. Stand down, Mr. Moretti. Give me one reason why I shouldn't scatter your brain across the studio right now. Because killing a federal agent guarantees your wife dies too. Cross's voice stayed steady despite the gun against his head. You shoot me. My team shoots you. Then they shoot everyone in this room, including her. Is that really how you want this to end? Silence stretched. Serafina watched Luca's face, saw the calculation happening, saw him weighing violence against survival, rage against strategy, the satisfaction of killing this man against the reality of getting her out alive. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. Smart, Cross said. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Nothing happens next. We walk out of here. You pretend you never found us. Can't do that. That book contains evidence of federal crimes, racketeering, money laundering, murder for hire. I have a legal obligation. Fuck your legal obligation. Luca's voice stayed quiet, but something lethal lived in his tone. You want that evidence? Fine. Take it. Use it to burn down every family in Chicago. But my wife walks, clean, no charges, no testimony. No looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life wondering when someone's going to put a bullet in her skull for cooperating. She is cooperating. She married you. That makes her complicit. She married me for protection after you got her father killed. That's not how the law works. Then maybe the law should work differently. Serafina's voice cut through the argument. Both men turned to look at her. She stepped out from behind the desk, legs shaking but voice steady. You want the evidence? You want names and dates and documentation that can actually convict people instead of just shuffling power around? Fine. I'll give it to you, all of it, but not for immunity. Cross's eyebrows rose. Then for what? Justice. She crossed to the work table. Her hands found the leather-bound book, fingers tracing her father's restoration work. My father died collecting this information. Adrian Knox died protecting his daughter from people who wanted it. A 12-year-old girl was murdered because of what's in these pages. So I'll cooperate. I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need, but not to save myself, to make sure their deaths meant something. Serafina, Luca started. No. She looked at him. At this man she'd married without understanding what marriage would cost. At this monster who'd protected her while simultaneously trapping her in a cage made of his own fear of loss. You don't get to make this decision for me. Not anymore. This is my father's work. My choice. Something in his expression cracked. You testify, you die. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually someone's going to decide you're a liability that needs eliminating. Then you'll protect me. I can't protect you from the entire criminal infrastructure of Chicago. You've been doing exactly that for 11 months. That was before you declared war on all of them. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fear behind his eyes, the same fear she'd seen in the SUV after Adrian's death, the same fear that made a man built from violence look almost human. Maybe I'm tired of surviving, she said quietly. Maybe I want to actually live. And living means making choices, even dangerous ones, even ones that scare you. For a long moment, Luca said nothing, just looked at her like he was seeing someone new, someone he recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. Then he turned to Cross. "What's your offer?" His voice was flat, empty. The sound of a man watching something important slip through his fingers. Full cooperation from Mrs. Moretti. Testimony. Evidence. Everything we need to build cases against organized crime operations across 3 states. Cross spoke quickly, sensing advantage. In exchange, witness protection, new identity, new location, complete severance from her previous life. "Including me," Luca said, "especially you." Cross's expression was sympathetic but firm. "You understand why. She can't cooperate against criminal organizations while being married to the head of one. The conflict of interest alone would destroy any prosecution we tried to build." Serafina felt something inside her chest tear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying cooperation requires divorce. Annulment, technically, since the marriage was contracted under false pretenses." Cross pulled papers from his jacket, official documents, legal forms already prepared. "Sign these, and everything that happened in the last 11 months gets erased. You become Serafina Vale again. He becomes the criminal you helped prosecute. Clean separation." The papers landed on the work table beside her father's book. Serafina stared at them, at the blank lines waiting for signatures that would unmake a marriage that had never really existed in the first place. Except it had existed. Somewhere between protection and possession, something had grown. Something real and complicated and painful. Something she didn't have a name for but could feel in her chest every time Luca looked at her like she was worth saving. "How long do I have to decide?" she whispered. 30 seconds, Cross said. "My team's outside. Vehicles are ready. We can have you in protective custody within the hour, but only if you commit right now. This offer expires the moment you walk out that door without signing." Her hand moved toward the papers, stopped, trembled. Luca's hand covered hers. "Don't," he said quietly. She looked up. His face was close enough that she could see every scar, every shadow, every piece of violence that had built him into something terrifying. "If I don't do this, my father died for nothing," she said. "If you do this, you die for something that can't be undone." His thumb traced circles on her knuckles. "They'll protect you for 6 months, maybe a year. Then budget cuts happen, personnel changes, someone decides witness protection is too expensive, and suddenly you're alone in Nebraska or Montana or wherever they stash people who cooperate with no skills for normal life and a target you can't see until it's too late. You don't know that. I know exactly that. I've killed 3 witnesses in federal protection. They're not as safe as they promise." The admission should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like honesty, the first completely unfiltered truth he'd given her since they met. "So what's my alternative?" she asked. "Stay married to you? Keep living in a fortress surrounded by men with guns? Wait for the next Adrian Knox to betray you? The next Vincent Ardelli to die in his own study? How many bodies do I step over before I admit this life will kill me too? At least you die as yourself." His voice dropped lower. "Not as some fake identity in a fake town living a fake life because you thought justice mattered more than survival. Maybe justice does matter more. Then you're braver than I am." The words hung between them like confession, like goodbye. Cross cleared his throat. 20 seconds, Mrs. Moretti." Serafina's hand moved toward the pen. Luca didn't stop her this time, just watched with eyes that had gone empty, resigned, like he'd known from the beginning how this ended. Her fingers closed around the pen. Then the window exploded. Glass and gunfire and chaos erupted simultaneously. Serafina hit the floor hard, Luca's body covering hers, weight crushing the air from her lungs. Around them, federal agents returned fire. Someone screamed. Bodies dropped. The studio that had been her father's sanctuary turned into a war zone in seconds. Luca dragged her toward the desk. Bullets punched through wood and plaster and everything that had seemed solid moments before. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only move where Luca pulled her, his hands on her shoulders, his voice in her ear saying words she couldn't process through the roar of violence. Roman appeared beside them. Blood streamed down his face from a cut above his eyebrow. "We need to move! Now! Where?" Luca shouted over gunfire. Down! There's a service shaft in the back storage room. Leads to the basement. That's been sealed for years. Not anymore. I had it opened after the apartment attack. Emergency exit protocol. Luca's eyes met Roman's. Understanding passed between them. You planned this. I planned for this. Difference. More gunfire. More screams. Cross went down hard, clutching his shoulder. 2 federal agents dragged him toward the doorway while others provided covering fire. The attack came from outside, from the rooftop across the street probably, or from windows in adjacent buildings. Professional, coordinated. The kind of hit that required planning and resources, and someone with enough reach to know exactly where they'd be and when. Who's shooting? Serafina gasped. Does it matter? Luca hauled her upright. Move! They ran. Through the storage room at the back of the studio, past shelves of supplies and half-finished projects and all the pieces of her father's life that would probably burn before morning. Roman yanked open a floor panel Serafina had never known existed, revealing a shaft that dropped into darkness. Ladder's stable, Roman said, goes straight to the basement, exits into the alley. You first, Luca ordered. Roman disappeared into the shaft. Luca turned to Serafina. Blood spattered his face. His suit was torn. He looked like violence incarnate and the only safe thing in a world that had turned into nightmare. Climb down, he said. Don't stop. Don't look back. Roman will get you out. What about you? I'm making sure no one follows. Luca. He grabbed her face between his hands, kissed her hard enough to bruise. When he pulled back, his eyes were smoke and determination and something that looked almost like love. If I don't make it out, he said quietly, don't sign those papers. Don't cooperate. Don't trust anyone who promises safety. Just disappear. Understand? You'll make it out. Promise me anyway. I promise. Another explosion of gunfire, closer this time. Luca pushed her toward the shaft. Go. She went, down into darkness. Hands finding ladder rungs that were slick with something wet. 20 feet. 30. Her muscles screamed. Her breath came in gasps. Above her, more gunfire. Someone shouting. Then an explosion that shook the entire building. Her hand slipped. She fell. Not far. Maybe 10 feet. Landed hard on concrete that knocked the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her ankle. She tried to stand, couldn't, collapsed back down. Roman appeared above her in the shaft. Don't move! He climbed down fast, dropped beside her. His hands found her ankle, examined it with surprising gentleness. Twisted, maybe sprained. Can you walk? I don't know. Try. He hauled her upright. She put weight on the injured ankle, and white-hot pain shot up her leg. She gasped, swayed, would have fallen if Roman hadn't caught her. That's a no, he muttered. Then he simply picked her up, throwing her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry that made her ribs scream. Hold on! He moved through the basement like he'd memorized the layout, past old boilers and storage units and foundation work that hadn't been touched since the building was constructed. Toward a door that opened into an alley currently being hammered by freezing rain. Roman set her down against the brick wall. Stay here. Don't move. I'm going back for... The building groaned. Then part of the 5th floor collapsed. Serafina watched in horror as the studio, her father's workshop, caved inward. Flames erupted through broken windows. Smoke billowed into the night sky. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but they wouldn't arrive in time to save anything. Luca, she whispered. Roman's face had gone white. He pulled out his phone, dialed, waited. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. No, Serafina breathed. No. He might have gotten out another way. You don't believe that. Roman's silence was answer enough. Serafina tried to stand. Her ankle buckled. She caught herself against the wall, tears streaming down her face from pain or grief or both. We have to go back. We have to survive. Roman's hands were gentle but firm as he steadied her. That's what he'd want. That's what he ordered. I don't care what he ordered. Well, I do, because his last words to me were, keep her alive no matter what. So that's what I'm doing. An SUV appeared at the alley entrance. Not one of theirs. Wrong configuration, wrong approach pattern. Roman's weapon came up instantly. Get behind me. But the vehicle stopped and the back door opened and a woman stepped out. 50s. Professional suit. Face Serafina recognized from photographs in Vincent Ardelli's study. Ardelli's daughter, Isabella Ardelli. And suddenly, with horrible clarity, everything made sense. "Hello, Serafina," Isabella said quietly. Rain plastered her hair to her skull, but she didn't seem to notice. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." Roman's weapon stayed trained on her chest. "Don't move. I'm not here to hurt her. I'm here to tell her the truth." Isabella's eyes locked on Serafina's face. "Your father didn't just document crimes. He documented my father's crimes specifically. Evidence that Vincent Ardelli had been embezzling from the Moretti organization for 20 years. Money laundering, skimming profits, building a war chest to fund a takeover when the timing was right." "You're lying," Serafina whispered. "Am I? Then why did someone kill your father 3 days before he was supposed to testify? Why did someone leak his cooperation with the FBI? Why did Vincent Ardelli end up dead in his study tonight with evidence pinned to his chest? You killed him, your own father." "I executed him for his crimes." Isabella's voice stayed level, empty. "He destroyed my family, turned my brothers into criminals, got my mother killed in crossfire from a war he orchestrated. So yes, when I finally discovered what he'd done, when I finally understood the full scope of his betrayal, I put a bullet in his brain." Roman's finger tightened on the trigger. "Boss is going to kill you for this. Your boss is dead. The building collapsed. I watched him fall." Isabella gestured at the burning structure. "So now there's just us. And a choice." "What choice?" Serafina managed through the grief clawing at her throat. "Your father's evidence doesn't just implicate criminals. It implicates everyone. Politicians, police, federal agents, people at every level who took money, looked the other way, enabled decades of violence because it was profitable." Isabella stepped closer. "Special Agent Cross. He's been on Vincent Ardelli's payroll for 3 years. He didn't come here to arrest anyone. He came to secure the evidence before it exposed his own corruption." The words landed like blows. "So here's your choice," Isabella continued. "Give me the evidence. Let me use it the way your father intended, to burn down the whole rotten system from inside. Or give it to Cross and watch him bury it while pretending to pursue justice that will never come. Why should I trust you? Because I have nothing left to lose. My father's dead. My family's destroyed. The only thing I have left is revenge." She held out her hand. "Give me the evidence. Let me finish what your father started." Serafina looked at the burning building, at the smoke rising into Chicago's night sky, at the place where Luca had died protecting her, even though protecting her had meant letting her go. Her hand moved to her jacket pocket, where she'd shoved the leather-bound book the moment gunfire started. She'd forgotten about it in the chaos, forgotten she'd grabbed it instinctively, the way someone grabs a lifeline when drowning. Now it felt like weight, like burden, like choosing who lived and who died based on who she believed more. A woman who'd murdered her own father, or a federal agent who'd used her as bait for 11 months. "Don't do this," Roman said quietly. "Serafina, please. Think about what Boss would want." "Luca's dead." The words came out flat, empty. "So what he wants doesn't matter anymore." She pulled the book from her pocket. Isabella's eyes gleamed, and somewhere in the distance, sirens grew louder. Serafina's hand trembled. The book felt heavier than it should, heavier than leather and paper and ink, heavy with the weight of choices that would shape whether her father's death meant anything or just added one more body to a pile that never stopped growing. "Last chance," Isabella said. "Give it to me or watch everything your father died for get buried by corrupt federal agents who'll use it to advance their own careers while actual justice never comes." Serafina looked at Roman, at this man who'd served Luca faithfully, who'd protected her because his boss had ordered it, who now stood in a freezing alley with blood on his face and loyalty in his eyes, waiting to see which way she'd break. "What do I do?" she whispered. "I can't tell you that," Roman said, "but I can tell you Boss believed in you, believed you were strong enough to make hard choices even when they hurt. So whatever you decide, make it because you believe in it, not because someone's pointing a gun at your head." The sirens were close now, maybe a block away. Isabella's hand stayed outstretched. "Decide now." Serafina's fingers tightened on the book. Then she made her choice. She threw the book toward Isabella with all the strength she had left. It sailed through the air, pages fluttering, evidence scattering like confetti. Isabella lunged for it, hands grasping, and an SUV slammed into her from the side. The impact was brutal. Instant. Isabella's body flew 15 feet before hitting the brick wall with a crack that suggested nothing survived intact. The SUV screeched to a halt. The driver's door opened. Luca stepped out, alive, bleeding, covered in soot and ash and probably his own blood, but alive. Serafina couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare as he crossed the alley toward her, moving like every step cost him, but stopping wasn't an option. "You're dead," she whispered. "Roman said, I saw the building." Roman was wrong. Building collapsed after I made it to the shaft. He stopped in front of her. His eyes swept across her face, checking for damage, cataloging injuries. "You hurt?" "Ankle, twisted." "Anything else?" "Everything else." Something in his expression softened. "Yeah, me too." Around them, chaos erupted. Federal vehicles arrived. Police, fire trucks, emergency personnel flooding the scene. Cross appeared from somewhere, shoulder bandaged, barking orders into a phone. Luca looked at the scattered pages of evidence covering the alley, at Isabella Ardeli's broken body, at the burning building that had held Serafina's father's life work until 20 minutes ago. "She tell you her plan?" he asked quietly. "She said she wanted to use the evidence to destroy everything, said Cross was corrupt, said the whole system was rotten. She was right about that." "About which part?" "All of it." He bent down slowly, wincing, and picked up scattered pages. "Cross has been dirty for years, taking payments, burying investigations. Your father knew. That's why he hid evidence instead of trusting witness protection." Serafina felt something inside her shatter. "So what do we do? Who do we trust?" "No one." Luca gathered more pages. "We trust no one. We keep the evidence, and we figure out how to survive long enough to decide what the hell it's worth. The FBI will never let us just walk away with federal evidence. The FBI can try to stop us." His smile had no warmth in it. "Let's see how that works out for them." Cross was moving toward them now, flanked by agents. His face was furious. "That evidence is federal property. Hand it over, now." "Come take it," Luca said quietly. Weapons appeared on both sides. Moretti soldiers emerging from shadows, federal agents forming a perimeter. Two sides facing off in a freezing alley over paper and ink and truths that could destroy cities. Serafina stood between them, injured, exhausted, covered in her husband's blood and her own grief, and realized with horrible clarity that this was never going to end. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Not until everyone who wanted this evidence was dead or she was. "Stop," she said. No one moved. "Stop!" Louder this time, loud enough that both sides hesitated. She looked at Cross. "You want justice? Real justice? Or do you want to advance your career by selectively prosecuting criminals while protecting the ones who pay you?" His face flushed. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious question. Answer it." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he lowered his weapon. "What are you offering?" "Cooperation, full testimony, everything my father collected. But not through you." "Then through who?" "Someone who can't be bought. Someone with enough authority that even corrupt federal agents can't touch them." She turned to Luca. "You said you knew people, people outside the usual channels, people who actually care about dismantling organized crime instead of just managing it." His eyes narrowed. "You're talking about going over their heads, straight to Washington, to people who will burn Cross's career along with every corrupt official in Chicago." "Yes. That's suicide. It's justice." "It's the same thing." "Then I guess I'm choosing suicide." Luca stared at her. At this woman he'd married to keep safe, who'd somehow transformed into someone willing to walk into fire if it meant dragging everyone else down with her. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. "I stopped being sure about anything the moment my father died. But I'm certain about this. Hiding evidence doesn't protect anyone. It just gives corrupt people more time to hurt more victims. So yeah, I'm sure." He nodded once, then turned to Roman. "Make the call." Which one? The one that scares me most. Roman pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Spoke quietly for 30 seconds. Hung up. Done, he said. They'll be here in 2 hours. Federal task force, clean, or as clean as anything gets in this city. Cross's face had gone white. You can't do this. We just did. Luca's voice stayed flat. So, here's what happens next. We all stand here in this freezing alley like civilized people. We wait for adults who aren't corrupt to arrive. And then Mrs. Moretti tells her story to people who'll actually listen instead of burying it. And if I refuse, then we have a different conversation. One that ends with significantly more bodies. Cross looked at his agents, at the weapons trained on them from shadows, at the reality that he was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. Slowly, he holstered his weapon. Fine, he said. We wait. But if this goes wrong, if this evidence disappears or gets compromised, I'm holding you personally responsible, Moretti. Fair. Luca's hand found Serafina's. But understand something. She's under my protection now. Officially. Anyone tries to hurt her, threaten her, or use her as bait again, I don't care what badge they're wearing. They die. We clear? Cross's jaw tightened, but he nodded. And so they waited. In a freezing alley beside a burning building while Chicago's emergency services swarmed around them like ants discovering a corpse. Serafina leaned against Luca, feeling his heartbeat through layers of torn clothing, feeling the warmth of him despite the cold, feeling alive in a way that terrified her because being alive meant having things to lose. What happens after? She whispered. After what? After I testify. After the evidence goes public. After everyone in Chicago knows I cooperated. His arm tightened around her shoulders. Then we figure out how to survive in a world that wants us dead. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan we've got. She looked up at him. At this man who'd killed for her, protected her, trapped her, freed her, died for her, and somehow still managed to look at her like she was worth all of it. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? For not signing the divorce papers. His expression shifted. Something painful crossed his face. You should have signed them. Would have been safer. Probably, but I didn't marry you for safety. You didn't marry me at all. I forced you. Maybe at first, but somewhere between protection and possession, I made a choice too. She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate. I chose to stay. That was before tonight, before you knew what staying actually costs. I know what it costs. I'm choosing it anyway. For a long moment, he didn't respond, just looked at her like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. Then he did something she'd never seen him do before. He smiled. Not the cold smile he gave enemies, not the controlled expression he wore like armor, a real smile. Small. Genuine. The kind that suggested underneath all the violence and strategy and carefully maintained control, there was still something almost human. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said quietly, or the most damaged. Can it be both? Yeah, I think it has to be. The task force arrived 90 minutes later, federal agents who looked young and serious and uncorrupted by years of taking payments under tables. They secured the scene, collected evidence, documented everything while Cross stood to the side looking like a man watching his career burn along with the building. A woman in her 40s approached Serafina, dark hair pulled back, eyes that suggested she'd seen worse things than burning studios and dead informants. Mrs. Moretti? I'm Assistant Director Karen Walsh. I understand you have information relevant to organized crime operations in Chicago. Serafina looked at Luca. He nodded once. Yes, she said. I have everything. And so she talked. She talked about her father's work, about the evidence he'd collected, about Adrian Knox and his daughter, about Vincent Ardelli and Isabella, about Cross's corruption, about everything that had led to this moment in this alley while freezing rain turned to snow and Chicago's night sky turned gray with approaching dawn. Walsh listened without interrupting, took notes, asked clarifying questions. When Serafina finished, Walsh looked at Luca. You understand that cooperating with this investigation means testifying against your own organization. I understand that keeping my wife alive matters more than protecting criminals who'd kill her the first chance they got, Luca said flatly. So yes, I'll cooperate, within limits. What limits? I'll give you corruption, money laundering, politicians and police who take payments, the infrastructure that enables organized crime. But I don't give you soldiers. I don't give you men who were just following orders because loyalty was their only option in a world that doesn't offer many. Walsh considered this. That's not how prosecution works. Then maybe prosecution should work differently. His voice stayed level. You want to dismantle organized crime? Start by dismantling the systems that make it necessary. Prosecute corrupt officials who force people into criminal enterprises because legitimate options don't exist. Go after money, not bodies. Otherwise, you're just playing musical chairs with violence. That's an interesting philosophy for a mob boss. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a survivor who's tired of watching good people die for bad reasons. Walsh's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been respect. I'll take it to my superiors, no promises, but I'll try. She moved away to confer with her team. Luca pulled Serafina closer. You okay? No, but I will be. When? Ask me in a year, maybe 5, maybe never. Fair. They stood together while snow fell and emergency services finished their work, and Chicago woke up to news of a fire that would dominate headlines for weeks. Somewhere in the wreckage of her father's studio, evidence burned, pages turning to ash, truths becoming smoke. But Serafina had already memorized enough, told enough, given enough testimony that the fire didn't matter. Her father's work would survive, and so would she, even if survival looked nothing like she'd imagined. We need to leave, Roman said quietly. He'd been standing guard, watching both federal agents and Moretti soldiers with the paranoia of a man who trusted nothing. Before someone decides cooperation doesn't need to be voluntary. Walsh approached again. Mrs. Moretti, we'll need you to come downtown, give a formal statement, start the process of protective custody. No protective custody, Luca interrupted. She stays with me. That's not safe. Neither is trusting federal protection after what happened to her father. His voice stayed quiet, but steel lived underneath. She cooperates. She testifies. But she doesn't leave my sight, ever. Those are my terms. Walsh looked like she wanted to argue. Then she looked at Serafina, bruised, bleeding, exhausted, and seemed to recognize that removing her from the only protection that had kept her alive for 11 months was a fight not worth having. Fine, but if anything happens to her, then you can prosecute me for failing to protect my own wife. Luca's smile was cold. Deal. Deal. They left the alley in an SUV that Roman drove like he was escaping a war zone. Maybe he was. Behind them, federal vehicles followed at a respectful distance. In front, 2 more SUVs cleared the way. A convoy. A prison. Safety. All 3 at once. Serafina watched Chicago scroll past through windows streaked with melting snow. Watched the city where her father had died, and she'd been reborn into something she still didn't fully recognize. Luca's hand found hers in the darkness. You know this changes everything, he said quietly. I know. We can't go back to how things were. I don't want to go back. Where do you want to go? She looked at him. At this man who'd saved her by trapping her, freed her by loving her, and somehow made her believe that survival and living might eventually mean the same thing. Forward, she said, wherever that leads. Even if it leads to more violence? Especially then, because at least we'll face it together. His expression shifted. The armor cracked just enough that she could see underneath, the fear, the hope, the desperate need to believe that loving someone didn't have to mean destroying them. Together, he repeated quietly, like testing the word. Like learning a language he'd never spoken before. Together, Serafina confirmed. And somewhere in the growing light of a Chicago dawn, she chose to believe that might actually be possible, even knowing what it would cost, even understanding that the war was just beginning, even recognizing that justice and survival rarely occupied the same space. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with the consequences, or die trying. The safe house wasn't safe. Serafina knew it the moment they arrived. The building looked secure. Reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, guards posted at every entrance. But security was an illusion. Always had been. The people hunting them didn't need to break through walls when they could buy the men guarding them. Roman checked every room twice before letting them inside. Luca stood in the entry hall, phone pressed to his ear, speaking Italian in tones that suggested he was giving orders people would die for not following. Blood from the alley had dried on his collar. Ash still streaked his face. He looked like war given human form. Serafina's ankle throbbed. The medic who'd examined her in the SUV had wrapped it tight and given her pills she hadn't taken. Pain kept her focused, kept her from falling into the shock that waited at the edges of her consciousness. Walsh appeared in the doorway with 2 agents flanking her. "We need to start your statement, tonight, before anyone has time to coordinate a response." "She needs rest," Luca said without turning around. "She needs protection. Statement first, rest after." "Statement after. Rest now. Or you can try dragging her downtown and see how many federal agents survive the attempt." Walsh's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm clarifying terms." Luca finally turned to face her. His eyes were smoke and exhaustion. "My wife just survived a building collapse, federal raid, and assassination attempt in the same night. She's injured, traumatized, and you want to stick her in an interrogation room for 6 hours? No, she sleeps, she heals. Then she talks. Every hour we wait gives criminals time to disappear. Every hour she spends awake without proper medical attention increases the chance she collapses before giving you anything useful." His voice stayed level, but steel cut through underneath. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let her rest for 8 hours. Then she'll give you everything. Names, dates, details. Enough to build cases that actually stick instead of falling apart, because your star witness was too exhausted to remember accurately." Walsh looked at Serafina. "Is that what you want?" Serafina's voice came out hoarse. "I want my father's evidence to matter. If that means resting first, then yes. That's what I want." For a long moment, Walsh didn't move. Then she nodded. 8 hours, not a minute more, and my people stay inside this building, non-negotiable. Fine, but they stay downstairs, separate floor, no one comes up without permission. Agreed. Walsh left with her agents. The door closed. Silence fell heavy enough to crush. Roman checked the windows again. Luca made 2 more calls. Serafina stood in the middle of the entry hall feeling like a stranger in her own body, numb and hyper-aware at the same time, every nerve ending screaming while her mind went quiet and distant. "You should shower," Luca said quietly. He'd ended his calls and crossed the room without her noticing. "Get the smoke out of your hair, the blood off your skin." "Whose blood? Does it matter?" "I think it might." He studied her face. "Some of it's yours, some's mine. Some probably belongs to people who didn't survive tonight. You want to know specifics, or can you accept that washing it off is better than cataloging whose death you're wearing?" The words should have been harsh. Instead, they felt practical, honest in the way only violence made possible. "Bathroom's upstairs," Roman said. He'd finished checking windows and now stood by the stairs looking like exhaustion wearing a suit. "Second door on the right, hot water works, towels are clean. I'll stand guard out here." Serafina climbed the stairs one painful step at a time. Her ankle screamed with each movement, but she refused help, refused to be carried or supported or treated like something fragile that needed handling. The bathroom was sterile. White tile. Chrome fixtures. No personality. Just function. She locked the door and stood in front of the mirror, finally looking at herself. The woman staring back was a stranger. Bruise spreading from her cheekbone into her eye, split lip, hair matted with blood and ash, clothes torn and stained, eyes that looked older than they had this morning. She'd been Serafina Vale when the sun rose. Now she was something else, something that had chosen violence instead of having it chosen for her. The shower water ran red, then brown, then finally clear. She scrubbed her skin until it hurt, trying to wash away more than blood. Trying to wash away the image of Adrian Knox dying in a hospital bed, the sound of Isabella Ardeli's body hitting brick, the sight of her father's studio burning while evidence turned to ash. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that smelled like industrial detergent, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Black pants, black sweater. Practical. Someone's idea of what a woman who'd just survived attempted murder should wear. She dressed slowly. Every movement hurt. The ankle, the ribs, the places on her body where impacts had left marks that would take weeks to fade. When she opened the bedroom door, Luca stood in the hallway. He'd showered too, changed into clean clothes, but the exhaustion in his eyes hadn't washed away. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Haven't tried." He gestured toward the stairs. "Thought you might be hungry." "I'm not." "You should eat anyway." "Stop telling me what I should do." "Stop being stubborn about basic survival." They stared at each other. Then Serafina laughed. It came out broken and sharp, but it was laughter. "We almost died tonight, multiple times. And you're arguing with me about eating. Has to be about something." His expression softened slightly. "Might as well be food." The kitchen was small but functional. Roman had ordered takeout, Chinese food in containers that were still warm. He sat at the table eating fried rice like violence hadn't happened. Like this was just another Tuesday. Maybe for him it was. Serafina picked at lo mein she didn't want. Luca drank coffee that was probably his fourth cup. No one spoke. Just three people sitting in fluorescent lighting, pretending normalcy existed. Then Roman's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face went white. "What?" Luca said. Not a question, a demand. "Marcus Santino just walked into the downtown FBI office." Roman's voice stayed level, but tension ran underneath. "He's cooperating, offering testimony about Moretti family operations in exchange for immunity." The container in Luca's hand crumpled. Coffee spilled across the table. "Marcus?" "Your financial guy," Serafina said quietly. "You said he was one of three people with enough reach to orchestrate this." "He's not orchestrating anything. He's saving his own ass." Luca stood abruptly. The chair scraped against linoleum. "He knows I'm cooperating with Walsh's task force. Knows evidence is going public. So he's getting ahead of it. Offering his version of events before mine becomes official." "What does that mean for us?" "It means he's going to paint himself as a victim who was forced into criminal activity by a violent boss. It means every financial crime my organization committed becomes my personal responsibility instead of his. And it means when prosecutors decide who to charge, they'll come for me instead of him." Roman was already moving, checking weapons, making calls, transforming from exhausted soldier into combat-ready enforcer in seconds. "We need to move," he said. "If Marcus is talking, he's telling them where we are. This location's compromised." "How?" Serafina's heart hammered. "Walsh's people are the only ones who know. Walsh's people work with other federal agents, who work with other law enforcement, who work with criminals on payroll. Information leaks. Always." Luca's hand closed around her wrist. "Get your shoes. We're leaving." "Where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." They moved fast. Down the stairs. Past Walsh's agents, who looked confused but didn't try to stop them. Into the SUV that Roman had kept running for exactly this scenario. The vehicle pulled away from the curb just as headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Wrong headlights. Wrong vehicles. Moving too fast. "Contact," Roman said quietly. He accelerated hard, throwing Serafina against Luca's shoulder. "3 vehicles. Professional approach pattern. Military grade." "Not FBI," Luca said. "Definitely not FBI." "Then who?" Gunfire answered the question. Bullets punched through the rear window. Safety glass spiderwebbed but held. Roman swerved hard right, taking a corner at 60 miles an hour. The pursuing vehicles followed. Serafina's hands gripped the seat hard enough to hurt. Her breath came in gasps. Beside her, Luca had his weapon out, checking the magazine with movements that suggested muscle memory older than conscious thought. "They're hurting us," Roman said. His eyes flicked between the road and the rear-view mirror, pushing us east, away from populated areas. "Toward the industrial district," Luca finished, "where they can kill us without witnesses." "Suggestions?" "Don't let them." Roman's laugh was sharp and humorless. He jerked the wheel left, jumping the curb, cutting through a parking lot that connected 2 streets. The pursuing vehicles split. 2 followed, 1 disappeared. "Lost one," Roman reported. "No, it's flanking." Luca leaned forward, scanning side streets. "There, coming from the north. They're boxing us in." More gunfire, this time from ahead. The windshield cracked. Roman ducked, but kept driving, aiming the SUV like a missile toward the space between buildings. They burst through into an alley. Brick walls on both sides, barely wide enough for the vehicle. Dumpsters scraped against the doors. Behind them, pursuit vehicles followed, their bulk making navigation impossible at this speed. How far to friendly territory? Luca asked. Define friendly. Anywhere with enough Moretti presence that these assholes think twice about open warfare. 4 miles, maybe 5. If we survive that long. The alley dumped them onto a main street. Late-night traffic, civilian vehicles, normal people living normal lives. The pursuing vehicles didn't care. They opened fire anyway. Serafina watched in horror as bullets meant for them punched through civilian cars. A sedan swerved and crashed into a storefront. Another vehicle spun out, blocking traffic. People screamed, ran, dove for cover while Chicago turned into a battlefield. They're willing to kill bystanders, she whispered. They're willing to do whatever it takes, Luca corrected. His voice stayed flat, empty. Which means we're not dealing with criminals anymore. We're dealing with something worse. What's worse than criminals? People who think they're righteous. Roman took another hard turn. The SUV tilted onto 2 wheels, nearly flipped, slammed back down. Serafina's head cracked against the window. Stars exploded across her vision. When they cleared, blood ran warm down her temple. Luca's hand found her face. Stay with me. I'm here. Stay anyway. More gunfire. The rear tire exploded. The SUV fishtailed. Roman fought for control, somehow keeping them moving forward, even as rubber shredded and metal scraped asphalt. We're done, Roman said. His voice stayed calm, but finality lived underneath. Vehicle's compromised. We need to bail. Where? There. He pointed at a building rising from the industrial wasteland. Old factory. Abandoned for decades. Chain link fence. Broken windows. The kind of place where bodies went to disappear. That's a trap, Luca said. Better than dying in traffic. Debatable. But Roman was already turning, aiming the dying SUV toward the fence. They hit it 40 miles an hour. Chain link tore. The vehicle crashed through into an overgrown parking lot, bounced over concrete barriers, and finally died 10 feet from the factory entrance. Smoke poured from the engine. The smell of burning oil filled the air. Move! Roman kicked his door open and rolled out, weapon raised. Luca pulled Serafina across the seat and out his side. Her ankle screamed when she put weight on it. She stumbled, would have fallen if Luca hadn't caught her. Can you run? He asked. I don't know. Try. They ran, across broken pavement, through the factory entrance, into darkness that swallowed them whole. Behind them, the pursuing vehicles crashed through the fence. Serafina's lungs burned. Her ankle was fire and agony. She felt Luca's hand on her back, pushing her forward, Roman ahead of them clearing the way with a flashlight that cut inadequate circles through the blackness. The factory was a corpse. Machinery left to rust. Conveyor belts frozen mid-operation. Evidence of a life that had stopped decades ago and never restarted. Up, Roman said. He'd found stairs, metal, probably unstable. Second floor. More exits. Better defensive position. They climbed. Each step felt impossible. Serafina's breath came in sobs. Her vision swam. Only Luca's grip on her arm kept her moving. Second floor was worse than the first. Floor partially collapsed. Holes leading to darkness below. Windows broken out completely, letting in freezing wind that cut through wet clothes. This is suicide, Luca said quietly. Better than dying downstairs. Roman moved to a window and looked out. They're surrounding the building. 6 men, maybe more, all armed, all moving with military precision. Not local criminals. No, these are professionals. Roman's jaw tightened. Someone hired specialists. Marcus, Serafina said. The name tasted like poison. He knew about the safe house. Knew we'd run. Probably had these people ready the moment he walked into that FBI office. Luca's expression was stone. Marcus is a coward who counts money. He doesn't have the spine for assassination orders. Then someone's pulling his strings. Or someone convinced him this was survival. Footsteps echoed from below. Voices called out in English with accents Serafina couldn't place. Professional, coordinated, moving through the building like they'd trained for exactly this scenario. Roman checked his weapon. I've got 1 magazine, maybe 15 rounds. You? Same. Luca's voice stayed level. Not enough for 6 professionals. Not if we fight fair. Who said anything about fair? They moved deeper into the second floor, found a space where machinery had collapsed, creating a natural barrier. Defensive position, killing field, place where 3 people could hold off 6 if they were smart and lucky and willing to do terrible things. Serafina crouched behind rusted equipment. Her hands shook. Not from fear exactly. From adrenaline and pain and the realization that this was how it ended. In an abandoned factory, hunted by professionals, with no backup and no way out. Luca settled beside her, his shoulder pressed against hers, warm, solid, real. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. Don't do the goodbye speech. Not goodbye. Truth." He looked at her in the darkness. "I told you I didn't love you when we married. That was accurate. But somewhere between protection and possession, somewhere between fear and fury, I stopped being able to imagine a world where you didn't exist in it. And I need you to know that before nothing." She grabbed his face between her hands, forced him to look at her. "We survived this, both of us, together. Then you can tell me all the truths you want. Understand?" Something in his expression cracked. "You really believe we're getting out of here?" "I believe we don't have a choice." "That's not the same thing." "It's close enough." The footsteps were closer now. First floor clearing complete. Starting up the stairs. Roman positioned himself behind a support beam with a clear line of sight. "When they come through that opening, I drop the first 2. You take the next. Then we see what happens." "What if more than 3 come through? Then we die shooting." "Not inspirational?" "Wasn't trying to be." Silence fell, heavy enough to feel physical. Serafina's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it, could feel it, could track her position by the sound alone. The first professional appeared in the opening. Roman fired twice, clean, efficient. The man dropped. The second professional came through fast, weapon raised. Luca's shot caught him in the chest. He staggered back, fell through a hole in the floor, screaming all the way down. Then chaos. 4 more came through simultaneously, not one at a time like targets. All together like they'd expected ambush and planned accordingly. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Bullets punched through rusted metal and rotten wood and empty air where heads had been seconds before. Roman took one in the shoulder, spun, kept shooting. Luca emptied his magazine, dropped it, reloaded with movements too fast to follow. And Serafina realized with horrible clarity that this was what he was. What he'd always been underneath the suits and control and carefully maintained civility. A weapon aimed at survival. One of the professionals got close. Too close. Luca dropped his gun and moved with brutal efficiency, grabbed the man's weapon arm, twisted, snapped bone with a sound like branches breaking, slammed his head into a support beam once, twice, until he stopped moving. Then Luca picked up the fallen weapon and kept shooting. The remaining professionals pulled back. Smart. Regrouping instead of dying stupidly. Silence crashed down. Roman slumped against his support beam, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "I'm hit." "How bad?" Luca crossed to him, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "Bad enough. Bullets still in there." Roman's face was white. "I can shoot, but I can't move well. You need to leave me." "Not happening." "Boss, be realistic." "I said not happening." Luca's voice went cold, final. "We all leave or none of us do." From below, voices called out, different language now, coordinating, planning their next assault. "They'll rush us next time," Roman said quietly. "All at once. Overwhelming force. We don't have enough ammunition to stop them." Serafina's mind raced. "Then we don't stop them. We escape." Both men looked at her. "How?" Luca asked. "We're on the second floor. Only exit is down, and they control the stairs." "Not the only exit." She pointed at the windows. "Fire escape. I saw it when we came up. Rusted, but maybe stable enough." "Maybe isn't good enough. It's better than definitely dying here." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Luca nodded. "Roman, can you climb?" "If the alternative is bleeding out in a factory, yeah. I can climb." They moved fast, across the floor, avoiding holes, toward windows that opened onto nothing but freezing air and a fire escape that looked like it had been installed when the building was built. Below, the assault started. Footsteps pounding upstairs. Multiple sets. coming fast. Luca reached the window first, examined the fire escape. It's not going to hold 3 people. Then it holds 2 at a time. Serafina's voice didn't shake. You and Roman go first. I'll follow. Absolutely not. You're injured. Roman's injured. I'm the fastest. If anyone stays to slow them down, it's me. Serafina, don't argue. Just move. The professionals burst onto the second floor. Luca grabbed her face, kissed her hard. If you die, I'm going to be very angry. Noted. Then he was gone. Out the window, onto the fire escape with Roman beside him. The metal groaned, bolts screeched, but it held. Serafina turned to face the assault. 4 men, armed, moving with coordinated precision. She had no weapon, no training, no plan except survive long enough for Luca and Roman to reach ground level. So she did the only thing that made sense. She ran. Not toward the window, toward them. The professionals hesitated, didn't expect prey to charge. That moment of confusion was everything. Serafina grabbed a piece of broken machinery, heavy, jagged, perfect, and swung it with every ounce of strength she had. It connected with the lead man's knee. He dropped screaming. She ran past them, into the darkness of the second floor, away from the window, making herself the target, the chase. Behind her, 3 professionals followed. Her ankle screamed, her lungs burned, but she kept moving. Through collapsed sections, around machinery, toward the far end of the building where another set of stairs led down. She reached them just as hands grabbed her from behind. She fell hard, slammed into metal stairs. Something cracked in her ribs. Pain exploded white-hot across her vision. A professional loomed over her, weapon raised. Then his head snapped back. He dropped. Behind him stood Luca. No weapon, just fists and fury and the kind of violence that didn't need tools. He moved through the remaining professionals like death itself. Broke bones, shattered faces. Didn't stop until they were all down and not moving. Then he grabbed Serafina and pulled her upright. Told you, we all leave or none of us do. You were supposed to escape. Escape without you? Not an option. He slung her arm over his shoulder. Can you walk? Do I have a choice? No. They descended the stairs. Roman waited at the bottom, weapon raised despite the blood loss. Clear? For now. Luca's voice was tight. But more will come. They always do. They emerged into the parking lot just as headlights appeared, not the professionals. Walsh's task force, 6 vehicles, armed agents, the cavalry arriving exactly too late. Walsh stepped out of the lead vehicle, took in the scene, blood, bodies, 3 survivors who looked like they'd crawled through hell. You were supposed to stay at the safe house, she said quietly. Safe house was compromised. Luca's grip on Serafina tightened. Marcus Santino leaked our location, hired professionals to kill us before we could testify against him. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's fact. He gestured at the factory. You want proof? Check the bodies upstairs, run their identification, see who hired them, follow the money. It'll lead straight back to Marcus. Walsh pulled out her phone, made a call, spoke quietly, hung up. Marcus Santino left the FBI office 2 hours ago, she said. His lawyer claimed he was exhausted, needed rest. We're bringing him back now. He'll run, Roman said. Blood still seeped through his makeshift bandage. The moment he knows this failed, he'll disappear. Then we move faster, Walsh signaled her people. Medics, now. Get them stabilized. EMTs swarmed, examined wounds, started IVs, wrapped injuries. Professional efficiency that felt surreal after the violence of the last hour. Luca refused treatment until Serafina was handled. Sat beside her in the back of an ambulance while medics cleaned her head wound and examined her ribs and rewrapped her ankle. 3 cracked ribs, the medic said. Possible concussion. Severe sprain. You need a hospital. No hospital. Serafina's voice came out hoarse. Not until I give my statement. Ma'am, I need to finish this. She looked at Walsh. You wanted testimony? You wanted evidence? Fine, let's do it, right now, before anyone else dies or disappears or decides cooperation is optional. Walsh studied her face, seemed to recognize that arguing was pointless. All right, we'll do it here. Mobile unit, full statement. But after, you go to a hospital, non-negotiable. After, I'll go wherever you want. But right now I talk. They set up in one of the task force vehicles. Recording equipment, stenographer. 2 agents as witnesses. Walsh sat across from Serafina with the expression of someone who'd seen too much but hadn't learned to stop caring yet. Whenever you're ready, Walsh said quietly. Serafina took a breath that hurt her ribs. Then another. Then she started talking. She talked about her father, about the evidence he'd collected, about every name, every date, every transaction she'd memorized from the leather-bound book before it burned. She talked about Adrian Knox and his daughter, about Vincent Ardelli and Isabella, about Cross's corruption, about Marcus Santino's betrayal. She talked for 2 hours straight without stopping, without hesitation, pouring out every truth her father had died protecting. When she finally finished, dawn was breaking over Chicago, gray light cutting through factory smoke and city smog. Walsh turned off the recorder. That's enough. More than enough. Is it true? Serafina asked quietly. What Luca said about prosecution, about survivors being targeted even after testimony. For a long moment, Walsh didn't answer. Then she nodded. Yes. Cooperation makes you valuable, but it also makes you vulnerable. People you testify against have long memories and longer reach. So what do I do? You survive. However you can. With whoever you trust. Walsh glanced toward Luca, who stood outside the vehicle watching. And you hope that's enough. Serafina followed her gaze. Luca looked like exhaustion and violence and determination all compressed into human form. He met her eyes through the window. Something passed between them. Not words, not promises. Just understanding that survival required choices most people never had to make. Can I go now? Serafina asked. After the hospital. No. Now. Before Marcus disappears or someone else decides I'm a threat that needs eliminating. She stood on legs that barely held her weight. I gave you everything. Names, evidence, testimony. Now I need to disappear before retaliation finds me. Walsh's expression tightened. That's not how this works. Then make it work differently. Serafina's voice didn't shake. Because I just survived 3 assassination attempts in one night, and I'm done being everyone's target. For a long moment, Walsh said nothing. Then she pulled out a card, wrote something on the back, handed it over. Burn her phone number. Use it if you need emergency extraction. But understand, once you leave federal protection, I can't guarantee your safety. No one can guarantee that. True. Walsh's expression softened slightly. But for what it's worth, your father would be proud. What you did tonight. The courage it took. He'd be proud. The words hit harder than bullets. Serafina stepped out of the vehicle into cold morning air. Luca was beside her instantly, hand finding her elbow, steadying her. We need to move, he said quietly. Marcus knows by now that this failed. He'll make his move soon. What move? Whatever desperate men do when they realize survival requires burning everything down. They walked toward Roman, who'd been treated and bandaged, but still looked like death warmed over. Can you drive? Luca asked. Can you pay me? I'll take that as yes. They found an SUV that wasn't shot to pieces. Climbed in. Roman started the engine. Where to, boss? Luca looked at Serafina. Something in his expression had changed. The armor was gone. Just exhaustion and determination and something that looked almost like hope. The estate, he said quietly. We end this where it started. That's, Serafina started. Dangerous, yes, but Marcus knows every safe house. Every backup location, every place we might run. His hand found hers in the darkness. The estate is the only place with enough security that he'll have to come in person if he wants us dead. And when he comes, we'll be waiting, she finished. Together. Together. The SUV pulled away from the factory as federal vehicles swarmed the scene. In the rearview mirror, Serafina watched the building shrink. Watched the place where she'd almost died become just another piece of Chicago's industrial decay. Ahead, the city woke up. Morning traffic. People going to work. Normal lives happening while hers spiraled toward a confrontation that would either end with justice or bodies. Maybe both. Luca's thumb traced circles on her knuckles. You know this might not end well. I know. You know Marcus won't come alone. I know that too. And you're still willing to finish what my father started? Yes, even if it kills me. Especially if it kills me with meaning instead of dying quietly while men like Marcus disappear and start over somewhere else. His expression shifted. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most broken. You said that already. She smiled despite the pain, despite the fear, despite everything. And I told you it's probably both. Yeah. His voice went quiet, soft. It probably is. The Moretti estate appeared on the horizon, fortress made of stone and money and 3 generations of violence. Serafina had walked out of it once, thinking she was choosing freedom. Now she was walking back in, choosing something else entirely. Choosing the kind of justice that required getting your hands bloody. Choosing survival that looked like war. Choosing the man beside her despite, or maybe because of, everything he represented. The gates opened. They drove through. And somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Santino made his final calculations, gathering whatever forces he thought would be enough to kill a woman who'd chosen to stop running and a man who'd chosen to protect her above everything else. The sun rose fully over the city, and the war they'd been fighting for 11 months was finally, inevitably, coming to its end. The estate was quieter than Serafina remembered. Not peaceful, just empty. Like the violence that had defined this place for generations had finally burned through everything combustible and left only ash. Luca stood in the entry hall making calls while Roman coordinated security from the study. Every soldier still loyal to the Moretti name had been summoned. 20 men, maybe 30, enough to make Marcus think twice about a frontal assault, not enough to guarantee survival. Serafina sat in the kitchen where this had all started, holding coffee she didn't drink. Her ribs ached with every breath. Her ankle throbbed despite the painkillers the medic had forced on her. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the exhaustion that went bone deep. She'd been awake for 36 hours, survived 3 attempts on her life, given testimony that would destroy half of Chicago's criminal infrastructure. And now she was waiting for the man who'd orchestrated it all to make his final move. The kitchen door opened. Luca entered, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. He crossed to the counter and poured himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. Marcus is moving, he said quietly. Just left his estate with 12 men, armed convoy, heading this direction. When will he arrive? 20 minutes, maybe less. He leaned against the counter, eyes on her face. You can still leave. Roman can get you out the back. Put you on a plane before Marcus ever knows you were here. We've had this conversation. I'm having it again. His voice stayed level, but desperation lived underneath. You gave your testimony. You did what your father wanted. You don't have to be here for what comes next. Yes, I do. Why? What does being here prove? That I'm not running anymore. She set down the coffee cup. Her hands were steadier than his. I spent 11 months as a prisoner in this house. Afraid, controlled, waiting for permission to exist. I'm done with that. Done letting other people decide when I'm safe enough to live. This isn't living. This is suicide with witnesses. Then I guess we're both dying today. Something in his expression cracked. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms with the kind of desperate strength that suggested he was trying to physically hold her together. Or maybe holding himself together through her. I can't lose you, he whispered against her hair. I know I don't have the right to say that. I know I trapped you and lied to you and spent 11 months treating you like property instead of a person. But somewhere in all that damage, you became the only thing I care about protecting more than my own survival. Serafina pulled back enough to see his face. Then protect me by letting me stand beside you instead of hiding me away like something fragile. You are fragile. You're hurt and exhausted, and I'm still here. Still choosing this. Still choosing you despite every logical reason not to. Her hands found his face. So stop trying to save me from choices I'm making with my eyes open. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he kissed her forehead, her bruised cheek, her split lip, each touch gentle enough to break. If this goes wrong, he started. It won't. But if it does, then we'll deal with it together, like we've dealt with everything else. Roman appeared in the doorway. Boss, they're here. The convoy arrived with the subtlety of an invasion. 6 vehicles, dark-tinted windows, Men pouring out with weapons that should have required military clearance. Marcus Santino emerged from the lead vehicle wearing an expensive suit and an expression that suggested he genuinely believed this would end in his favor. 50s. Soft around the middle, the kind of man who'd spent his life making money for violent people while pretending his hands were clean. Luca stood on the front steps with Serafina beside him and Roman flanking them. 20 Moretti soldiers formed a semicircle behind them, not quite an army, but enough to make the message clear. Marcus stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if necessary. "Luca," he said, voice friendly, familiar, like they were colleagues instead of enemies. "You look terrible. Have you been getting enough sleep?" "Cut the bullshit, Marcus. Why are you here?" "To make you an offer." Marcus gestured at his men. "I know you've been talking to the FBI. I know Serafina gave testimony. I even know what she said because I have people inside Walsh's task force who tell me things. So you came here to kill us before the indictments come down." "Kill you?" Marcus looked genuinely offended. "Luca, we've worked together for 8 years. I don't want you dead. I want you reasonable." "Reasonable how?" "Retract the testimony. Tell Walsh your wife was traumatized, confused, that everything she said was influenced by stress and fear and being married to a violent man." His smile had no warmth in it. "You do that, and this all goes away. No prosecution, no war. We restructure the organization under new leadership, and everyone walks away breathing." New leadership meaning you. Someone has to run things. You've proven you can't separate business from emotion. That marriage, he gestured at Serafina with contempt, turned you soft, made you vulnerable. Your father would be ashamed. Luca's jaw tightened. "My father was a paranoid sociopath who died alone because he drove away everyone who ever cared about him. So forgive me if I'm not taking leadership advice from his ghost." Marcus's expression hardened. "I'm giving you a chance to survive this, Luca. Take it." "And if I don't?" "Then I take what's mine anyway. Your organization, your territory, your assets, all of it." He looked at Serafina. "And I make sure your wife understands the cost of cooperation." Serafina stepped forward before Luca could respond. "You want me to retract my testimony? Come, make me." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me? You want to threaten me? Kill me? Do it yourself instead of hiding behind hired guns and corrupt agents." Her voice didn't shake despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Or are you too much of a coward to get your hands dirty?" For a long moment, Marcus just stared. Then he laughed. "You think you're brave? You're just stupid. You think giving testimony protects you? All it does is sign your death warrant in a language everyone can read." "Then come collect." Marcus's smile dropped. He pulled a weapon from his jacket. Not quickly, not dramatically, just practical. Like this was business he'd done 100 times before. "I'm going to enjoy this," he said quietly. Then the world exploded. Not metaphorically, literally. The lead vehicle in Marcus's convoy erupted in flames. Then the second, then the third. Explosions that rocked the ground and sent men diving for cover. Through the smoke and chaos, more figures appeared. Not Moretti soldiers, not Marcus's men, federal agents, Walsh's task force. 50 of them, armed, armored, moving with coordinated precision that suggested they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Walsh herself walked through the smoke like something inevitable. She stopped in front of Marcus, who dropped his weapon and raised his hands with the practiced ease of someone who'd always known this day might come. "Marcus Santino," Walsh said calmly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, and about 15 other charges we'll figure out later. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus's face had gone white. "You can't. I have lawyers." "Your lawyers can meet you at the federal courthouse." Walsh signaled her people. 2 agents moved forward with handcuffs. "Along with Special Agent Cross and every other corrupt official you've been paying for the last decade. We got your financial records, Marcus. All of them. Turns out embezzling from criminals still counts as embezzling. I want immunity. You already offered testimony. Then you tried to have the witnesses killed. Immunity's off the table." She looked past him at Luca. "Mr. Moretti, Mrs. Moretti, you're both free to go. Your cooperation has been noted and appreciated." Luca's expression was carefully neutral. "Just like that?" Just like that. We got what we needed. You gave us evidence. We're making arrests. Clean ending. She paused. Well, as clean as anything gets in this business. Marcus was being dragged toward a federal vehicle, still shouting about lawyers and immunity and how this wasn't legal. His men had scattered, some arrested, some running. None of them willing to die for a boss who'd proven loyalty was just a transaction. Serafina watched him disappear into the vehicle, watched the convoy pull away, watched the man who'd orchestrated her father's murder and Adrian's torture and Emily's death get reduced to just another criminal being processed through a system that would probably fail to deliver actual justice. But he was in custody. That had to mean something. Walsh approached Serafina directly. Your father would be proud of what you did, the courage it took, the sacrifice. Would he? Serafina's voice came out tired. Or would he be horrified that his daughter chose violence over escape? I think he'd understand that sometimes survival requires becoming something you never wanted to be. Walsh's expression softened. You should leave Chicago. Both of you. Disappear for a while. Let the prosecutions play out. Come back when the smoke clears. How long will that take? Years, maybe longer. These cases are complex. Appeals take time, and even after convictions, there will be people who blame you for cooperating. So we run. You survive. There's a difference. Walsh left with her task force. Federal vehicles pulling away, silence falling heavy over the estate grounds. Luca turned to Serafina. She's right. We need to leave. Where would we even go? Anywhere that isn't here. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere the name Moretti doesn't mean anything. His hand found hers. I have property in Montana, middle of nowhere. No neighbors. No criminal empire. Just space and silence, and maybe a chance to figure out who we are when we're not fighting for survival. Serafina looked at the estate, at the place where she'd been imprisoned and protected and transformed into something she still didn't fully recognize. What about your organization? Roman can run it, or dismantle it. I don't care anymore. Luca's voice was quiet, final. I spent 20 years building an empire on blood and fear. I'm done. Whatever comes next, I want it to be about living instead of just surviving. You really mean that? Ask me again in Montana and see if my answer changes. She smiled despite the exhaustion, despite the pain. Okay. Let's go. Let's leave. Let's see if monsters like us can actually learn how to be human. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite hope, more like possibility. 3 days later, they left Chicago in an unmarked car with nothing but the clothes they wore and money that couldn't be traced. Roman stayed behind to handle the dissolution of what remained of the Moretti organization. Soldiers were paid out. Territory was surrendered. Decades of criminal infrastructure were systematically dismantled because the man at the top had chosen a woman over an empire. The drive to Montana took 2 days. They stopped at motels with names they didn't recognize, ate at diners where no one knew who they were, slept in beds that smelled like industrial detergent instead of expensive sheets. Normal. Or as close to normal as people like them could achieve. The property was exactly as Luca described. Middle of nowhere. Mountains in the distance. A cabin that was more functional than beautiful. Space and silence and nothing that resembled the life they'd left behind. Serafina stood on the porch that first evening, watching sunset paint the sky colors that didn't exist in Chicago. Luca emerged from inside with coffee that was too weak and sandwiches that were uneven. I'm not good at domestic life, he said quietly. Neither am I, so we'll learn together. Or fail spectacularly. That's also an option. They sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching darkness fall over landscape that felt like another planet. No sirens, no gunfire, no violence waiting around every corner, just quiet. After a long silence, Serafina spoke. Do you think my father knew? When he was collecting that evidence, do you think he knew it would cost him everything? Probably. Luca's voice was soft. But I think he also knew some things are worth dying for. Justice, truth. Making sure his daughter inherited a chance at a real life instead of just survival. He failed then. I didn't get a real life. Didn't you? He looked at her. You survived. You fought. You made choices that terrified you. You became someone strong enough to stand in the middle of a war zone and demand justice instead of running. That's pretty real. That's pretty damaged. Same thing sometimes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. What do we do now? We heal. We learn how to sleep without weapons under our pillows. We figure out what normal people do with their time when they're not plotting survival or dodging assassination attempts. He paused. And eventually, maybe we figure out what this marriage actually is when it's not built on protection and fear. What if there's nothing underneath? Then we build something new, from scratch, as equals instead of captor and prisoner. Serafina lifted her head to look at him, really look, at this man who'd terrified her and protected her and somehow become the only person in the world she trusted completely. I think I might actually love you, she said quietly. Not the version I married, not the monster Chicago fears, just you, the man who chose me over everything he'd built, the man who's sitting here trying to make sandwiches and pretending he knows how to be normal. His eyes went bright. Not tears exactly, just emotion he'd spent a lifetime suppressing, finally finding its way to the surface. I definitely love you, he said. Have for months. Maybe since the night you walked out, and I realized losing you hurt worse than any bullet I've ever taken. That's not romantic. It's honest. Fair enough. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Not expensive, just a simple band of silver that looked like it came from a gas station somewhere between Chicago and here. I'm not asking you to marry me again, he said quietly. We're already married, but I'm asking if you want to stay married. To me. To this. To whatever weird version of normal we managed to build out here. Serafina looked at the ring, at his face, at the Montana sky and the cabin and the space that felt like possibility. Yes, she said simply. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too big, needed resizing, imperfect in every way that mattered, perfect for exactly that reason. They sat on the porch until stars appeared, until cold drove them inside, until exhaustion finally pulled them toward sleep that came without nightmares for the first time in months. In the bedroom, Luca held her like she might disappear if he let go, like 11 months of careful distance had left him starving for simple contact. We're going to be terrible at this, Serafina whispered against his chest. Probably. We're going to fight, hurt each other, make mistakes. Definitely. So why does it feel like we might actually survive? His arms tightened around her. Because survival's what we're good at, and maybe that's enough to build on. Maybe. Definitely, maybe. She smiled in the darkness. Then sleep took her under, deep and dreamless. The kind of sleep that only came when your body finally believed the danger had passed. When she woke, sunlight streamed through windows that didn't have bars. Luca was already awake, watching her with an expression that suggested he'd been doing so for a while. What? She asked. Nothing. Just making sure you're real. Still real. Good. They made breakfast together, burned toast, overcooked eggs, coffee that was still too weak. Then they walked outside into morning air that tasted like pine and possibility. 6 months later, Serafina stood in the same spot, looking at mountains that had become familiar. The bruises had faded, the cracked ribs had healed, the ankle worked properly again. Only the scars remained, physical and otherwise. Luca appeared beside her, carrying firewood for winter that was approaching fast. He looked different now, less like violence in a suit, more like a man learning what peace actually felt like. Walsh called, he said. Trials are starting. Marcus got 40 years, Cross got 20. Most of the politicians took plea deals. And us? Free, clear, no charges. We're officially boring citizens who live in Montana and don't do anything interesting. How disappointing. Isn't it? She smiled. Did she say anything about Chicago? Said the city's quieter. Less organized crime, more regular crime. Progress, apparently. He set down the firewood and pulled her close. She also said we can come back. If we want. Testify in person. Face the men we helped convict. Do you want to? He considered. No. I think I've had enough of facing my past. I'd rather build a future. Here? Here. With you. Making terrible coffee and burning toast and learning how to be the kind of people who don't solve problems with violence. Think we can actually do that? Ask me in another 6 months. They stood together watching snow start to fall. First of the season, covering everything in white, making the landscape look clean, new, like the past had been buried under something pure. Serafina knew better. The past never stayed buried. It was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to resurface when you least expected it. But maybe that was okay. Maybe learning to live with your past instead of running from it was what healing actually looked like. Maybe choosing love after violence was the bravest thing two damaged people could do. That night, they sat by the fire Luca had built. The cabin was warm, safe, theirs. "I've been thinking," Serafina said quietly. "Dangerous. About my father, about what he wanted for me. What did he want? A real life, normal, safe, everything this isn't." Luca's expression tightened. "If you're having regrets, I'm not. That's the thing. I think he wanted me to be safe more than he wanted me to be happy. But maybe they're not the same thing. Maybe real life is messy and dangerous and full of choices that scare you. Maybe that's better than safe and small and never risking anything." "You really believe that? I'm here, aren't I? In Montana. With you. Building something from nothing. That's not safe. But it's real. And for the first time since he died, I think I'm actually living instead of just surviving." Luca pulled her closer. "Your father would be proud of you, for what it's worth. I think he'd look at who you became and recognize that strength doesn't mean avoiding violence. It means surviving it and still choosing to love anyway." "Is that what we're doing? Loving?" "I think so. Either that or we're both too stubborn to admit this is a terrible idea." "Probably both." "Definitely both." They fell asleep by the fire, tangled together. Warm despite the snow falling outside. Safe despite everything they'd survived to get here. And somewhere in Chicago, trials continued. Justice moved forward slowly. The evidence Serafina's father had died protecting was finally being used to dismantle the systems he'd spent years documenting. His work mattered. His death meant something. And his daughter lived on. Scarred, but whole. Damaged, but healing. Building a life that would never be normal, but might actually be happy. Which was more than most people got. Especially people like them. The next morning, Serafina stood on the porch with coffee that was still terrible and watched Luca chop wood with movements that were becoming natural instead of violent. He looked up, caught her watching, smiled in a way that made him look almost young. She smiled back. And in that moment, surrounded by Montana mountains and morning light and the possibility of years stretching ahead, Serafina Vale, now Serafina Moretti in truth instead of just contract, made peace with the choices that had brought her here. She'd walked into Luca Moretti's life as a prisoner. She'd stayed as a partner. And now she was building something new. Something that looked like love, despite being constructed from violence and fear, and two people learning what trust actually meant when you'd both been betrayed by everyone else. It wasn't the life her father had imagined for her, but it was hers, chosen, earned, built from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy her. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.